It's 3 a.m. and the facility is quiet. Office workers and administrators roam the halls. Security officers stand at their posts, clad in advanced tactical armor and carrying standard-issue M4 carbines. 3 Foundation employees sit at flickering monitors watching a live feed of footage from the containment cell of the infamous SCP-106, or as it's referred to by all staff, the Old Man. No Foundation personnel are permitted to travel within 60 feet of the cell for security reasons, and nobody is permitted to physically interact with the anomaly without the approval of 2/3 of O5 Command. The observer's eyes itch and sting from hours of unending blue light exposure, but they can't look away. The Old Man is crafty. He might have the insatiable bloodlust of a hungry great white shark, but he's not mindless. He's a calculating predator, more sadistic than the worst human serial killer, and he's always searching for the next opportunity. According to the Foundation records, he's been active since at least World War II, and it's estimated that he has hundreds if not thousands of victims to his name, and many of those made simple but extremely foolish mistakes of underestimating him. After all, it only takes a few seconds of inattentiveness and the briefest moment of distraction to give him the window he needs. To do what, you ask? Oh, don't worry, you'll find out, just like they did. The Old Man has his nickname for a reason. Most of the time, he really does look exactly like that, an old man, or more specifically an old man's decaying corpse, his body covered in rotten, dark, grayish-black flesh that looks like putrid meat. Though the creature has been observed being able to change shape, the rot seems to run too deep for the Old Man to ever hide it. Foundation employees that have observed SCP-106 for extended periods of time have reported seeing it assume the form of grinning, decayed children and women whose rotted flesh barely hangs on their creaking bones. Just seeing the images through a video feed is enough to cause a lifetime of insomnia and other sleeping issues. Still, they have a job to do and the cameras remain fixed on the Old Man. He's been completely motionless for 3 months, just sitting there like a Buddhist monk in deep meditation. A novice might see this period of inactivity as a cause for celebration, but those with experience know that this is merely the calm before the storm. SCP-106 can remain in a dormant state for months at a time. Described by the Foundation scientists as a lulling state, it's believed that the Old Man is simply waiting for its captors to get soft, make a mistake, or simply have a momentary lapse in concentration, which is all it needs to make its move. It had happened so many times before, and it was about to happen again. One of the observers must have felt an overwhelming wave of anxiety as he saw the creature ever so slightly twitch. Just a tiny quiver in the shoulder muscles, but that was enough to tell the observer that their day had just taken a terrifying turn. He grabbed the emergency phone fixed to his desk and practically screamed into the receiver that 106 is moving, that they need a tactical team stat. But it was already too late. He and the other 2 observers stared into the monitors with their mouths agape as a gooey, rust-like substance began to pool around the creature on the floor of its cell. Slowly, the creature craned its withered neck around. Its face was fixed into a broad, yellow-toothed, lipless grin. Its eyes had the kind of dull, flat malice of an underwater predator. It looked directly into the camera, directly at them, and smiled. The observers knew this was bad. Really, really bad. With what they could have sworn was a little nod, the Old Man began sinking into the rusty puddle it made on the ground beneath it, until it had disappeared entirely. SCP-106 is capable of phasing through any solid surface with ease, making it one of the hardest entities to reliably contain, and earning it a spot on the dreaded Keter class, reserved for the anomalies that are complete nightmares to keep locked up. Through the years of costly research and deadly trial and error, the Foundation would later devise ways of at least slowing the creature down. It's shown to have an aversion to lead, highly complex or random physical structures, and intense bright light. None of these cause harm to the creature, as far as we know, literally nothing can, but they'll at least buy you some precious extra seconds with which to at least try and escape. Seconds the 3 observers didn't have. One of them grabbed an emergency line again and barked into it that they had lost visual on the anomaly. Just then, the observers heard a faint, crackling sound behind them and the hissing of a chemical burn. They turned in horror to see a huge rusty burn mark expanding across the wall, right next to the door, which was their only escape route. They backed as far away from the door as they could as a rotten hand began reaching out of the mass of corrosive black sludge, followed by the grinning face of SCP-106, ready to have some fun. Meanwhile, 2 heavily armed security officers, Agents Goodwin and Resnick, came charging down the corridor toward the observation rooms, It became a bleak slogan during SCP-106 escape attempts that all you need to do is follow the screams, and that motto was proven true that night because awful things were happening to the observation personnel. They were certainly screaming about it. Of course, even with the top-of-the-line firearms, there was little they could do to harm the rampaging old man. He seemed immune to all forms of physical damage. All they could hope to do was keep the thing distracted until the scientists and containment specialists finished the preparations to lure him back into his containment cell. Goodwin surged forward while Resnick covered his six. Vigilance was key, as unlike a standard human combatant, SCP-106 could attack from literally any angle, including above or below. Physical obstacles were irrelevant to him, and no cover was safe. The hardened security officers could see the burn mark on the wall of the observation room as they approached. SCP-106 was perpetually coated in a thick black mucus with powerful corrosive properties that left any surfaces it touched permanently marred. Foundation scientists speculated that this mucus served as a kind of pre-digestive substance that tenderizes meat and bone alike, but to what purpose this serves is a mystery, as the old man has never been observed eating. It's postulated that the only purpose is causing additional pain. Goodwin and Resnick knew to treat this hissing sludge as a potential threat, as the corrosive properties would remain active for as much as 6 hours before finally fizzling out. The two officers shared a quiet nod before Goodwin breached the observation room door with a hard kick. The two of them surged inside, guns at the ready. In their time working at the Foundation, they'd seen some truly horrific sights. From the mutilation of D-Class personnel, typically death row prison inmates brought in for use as SCP guinea pigs, to the violence and mayhem of a containment breach. But there was nothing in their past that would ever make the horrifying sight they saw in the observation room that night feel normal. All three observers were dead. Almost nothing remained of two of them, and the third, while still intact, no longer looked human. He looked like he'd somehow been dead 100 years in the brief period that the old man had been free. His skin was gray and completely dried out, and his mouth was locked into a perpetual scream. It was a massacre, but there was no sign of the old man. Goodwin grabbed his radio and whispered, "This is Goodwin in Observation Room 6, requesting immediate backup. We have no idea where this thing," but his sentence was cut off by a sudden scream from Agent Resnick. SCP Foundation security officers are as tough as nails, the best of the best, you might say, recruited from the top military organizations in the world. So hearing one of them scream in fright is a rare, if not impossible, occurrence. But even they were forced to yell out in fear when they looked up to see the old man standing on the ceiling, grinning down at them. Resnick raised his M4 and shot a 3-round burst at center mass. SCP-106 didn't care. Even under sustained gunfire from the two security officers, it didn't flinch. The old man simply reached down and snatched Agent Resnick from the ground like it was picking an apple from a tree. The old man held Resnick in one hand and pounded its other rotten fist into the agent's body, breaking all of his bones. Resnick screamed for his partner to help him, but there was no time. Before Goodwin could do anything, SCP-106 began receding back into another slimy burn mark on the wall. Only this time, he was taking his screaming victim with him. Agent Resnick gave one more horrified scream before he was pulled backward into the inky darkness, leaving the room silent except for the burning hiss of the corrosive goo left behind. You might think this would be the end of it, but no. For poor Agent Resnick, the worst was yet to come. He was being dragged into what the SCP Foundation scientists refer to as the Old Man's Pocket Dimension, a miniature layer of reality within our own where the malicious SCP is essentially a cruel, all-powerful god. According to witness reports extracted from victims who were taken to this little nightmare realm, the dimension resembles a series of twisting, endless corridors where the old man stalks and tortures his captured victims to the breaking point, manipulating space and time to his own sadistic ends. On rare occasions, the SCP will even release its victims just for the joy of hunting, capturing, and torturing them all over again. While Agent Resnick was learning the true meaning of terror, containment specialists were mobilizing in its cell, preparing the one known tried and true method of luring the old man back, tempting it with the prospect of causing even more suffering. In order to do this, Foundation personnel take one of the aforementioned Class D personnel and begin inducing extreme pain by breaking a major bone or slicing a tendon every 20 minutes. The victim's agonizing screams are then played over the facility's intercom, acting as bait for the pain-loving old man. The screams echo through the facility's otherwise silent halls as the mutilated corpse of Agent Resnick falls from a new scorch mark on the ceiling. The old man can hear the sounds of suffering ringing out through the air around him, and he can barely contain his excitement over the prospect of a new plaything. The snapped femurs, the torn Achilles tendons, it was all too good to miss. Having had its twisted fun with the security officers and observers, SCP-106 wandered back to its containment cell, where a new screaming victim awaited. The other security officers, containment specialists, and scientists evacuated the area, leaving the old man alone with his prey. While the unfortunate Class D was left to his fate, the rest of the staff commenced cleanup procedures, which mainly involve wiping the brown and black mucus from the walls. It would probably be at least another month before anything like this happened again, and new personnel would be transferred over to the facility to replace the fallen. All in all, just another night at the SCP Foundation.
No matter how different we are from each other, everybody has a shadow. It is a constant companion, always with us no matter where we go. Unless where we go is in a room with all the lights off, of course. As a child, shadows seemed mysterious or even terrifying. But as we get older, we learn that shadows are nothing to be concerned about, just your body blocking light. Of course, at the SCP Foundation, nothing is what it seems, and a shadow is never just a shadow. Near an abandoned Air Force base in Afghanistan, nestled next to a set of human remains, the Foundation discovered an unusual object capable of turning a simple shadow into a prison. SCP-272 is an iron nail, 11.5 centimeters in length, covered in engravings of an unknown origin. The engravings have not yet been identified or traced to a specific civilization, but the research staff assigned to the object have described them as captivating but scary. It was discovered during a sweep pulled out of a rock face by a member of Foundation personnel. At first, he believed it to be an ordinary nail, until he dropped it. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, he was unable to move from the spot. He stood there calling out for help for 20 minutes before another member of personnel picked up the nail and he regained full range of motion. SCP-272, like many other objects in Foundation containment, is almost eerily mundane. Aside from the engravings on its surface, the nail looks like any other nail you might find scattered on the ground. Its true nature only reveals itself if you happen to drop it. Determined to learn more about the nail's properties, limitations, and potential unknown adverse effects, the Foundation conducted a series of experiments. The first experiment was conducted at the discovery site for SCP-272, the rock face in Afghanistan. A D-class, referred to as D-272-01, was handed the nail and instructed to hammer it into his shadow, in the area of his feet. Once the nail was 2/3 into the rock, 01 was no longer able to move. He attempted to run but could not lift his feet. He stood there sweating and immobile until he collapsed from heat stroke. At this point, a researcher intervened and attempted to carry the unconscious man out of the sun. No matter how hard they tried, his body could not be moved until they removed the nail. 01 was taken to a hospital and administered fluids and a medical exam, and testing was suspended for the day. After determining that the nail immobilizes its victims by trapping their shadows and them in place, the research team wanted to test the limitations of this effect. If the nail needs a shadow to work, then what happens when there is no shadow present? A new D-Class 02 was selected and brought into the same discovery site. This time, however, they went after dark at approximately 10 p.m. The nail was dropped at 02's feet and embedded itself in the earth without needing to be hammered. Then 02 was instructed to walk 10 meters away from the nail. He managed this easily with no adverse effects. The experiment was relatively uneventful until 02 attempted to flee the scene and was terminated for his escape attempt. The body was disposed of, and the research team made note of their findings. The nail does not work if the subject is not casting a shadow. So if total darkness kept the nail from working, and bright light meant it worked completely, what would happen if the light changed in the middle of the experiment? 2 hours before sunrise, the very same night, another D-Class was brought into the site. The subject, 03, was instructed to walk away from the nail in a straight line until he was told to stop. 2 hours later, when the sun came up, all hell broke loose. 03 was pulled into pieces as his body attempted to make its way back to the direction of the nail by any means necessary. His legs were yanked back towards the nail and were collected several feet from it. His torso, on the other hand, was located 106 meters away from the nail, with signs of road rash and severe trauma. 3 cleanup teams were required to remove all evidence of the carnage. The nail was removed to test facility 25-H, and the team decided to put an end to any further experimentation involving Sunrise. Several lighting-based experiments followed the Sunrise disaster, all with relatively uneventful findings. The research continued in this way until one member of the research team, Dr. Cho, posited a new question. What happens if the nail is embedded in 2 overlapping shadows? 2 other members of D-Class personnel, 04 and 05, were positioned under stadium lights so that their shadows overlapped. The nail was dropped onto a point where the shadows were on top of each other and promptly embedded itself in the ground. Both subjects were instructed to attempt to move away from the nail. 05 was completely trapped, unable to move her feet or walk away. Meanwhile, 04 was able to move freely with no consequences except for a feeling of a chill. So the nail is only able to hold one person at a time. In an attempt to see if there is a pattern present in terms of which person the nail will hold, if presented with multiple options, a follow-up experiment was conducted with 8 members of D-Class personnel, ranging in age from 18 to 59 years old. All 8 subjects were placed with their shadows overlapping, and the nail was dropped onto the point of overlap. The youngest subject, an 18-year-old boy, was held still by the nail. The other 7 test subjects let out a scream when the nail hit the ground, and were reported to shiver throughout the duration of the test. When the 18-year-old was taken out of the study and the experiment was repeated, the second youngest person in the group was held in place. The experiment was repeated 4 more times, removing a subject each time until subject 07 collapsed from hypothermia. The next experiment was conducted outside, in a grassy field near the test site. Subject 05 was placed on the grass and handed a shovel. Once the nail was firmly in the subject's shadow, she was instructed to dig it out of the dirt. 05 began digging and proceeded normally at first. After 90 seconds, however, she fell to the ground screaming in agony. A medic rushed to her side, but by the time he reached her side, she was already dead. An autopsy determined that subject 05 died of a cerebral hemorrhage with no clear physical cause, though it appears that the attempt to remove the nail is what killed her. The research team decided to take a break from human trials and take a closer look at the physical properties of the nail itself. What weaknesses did it have? Could it be destroyed? Subject 09 was given the nail and a collection of tools, then instructed to go to town on the object and attempt to destroy it. 09 placed the nail in a vise and attempted to go at it with an angle grinder. As soon as the grinder touched the nail, 09 fell to the ground seizing and speaking in tongues, hands pressed to his temples. 30 seconds later, he was dead from the same kind of cerebral hemorrhage that killed subject 05. Examination of the nail revealed a small amount of surface damage, showing that the nail likely can be destroyed, but is somehow able to defend itself against destruction. Regular human trials were resumed the next day, and Subject 10 was brought into the test facility. There, one stadium light was placed on a computer-controlled track, allowing the light to be shifted incrementally from a remote point outside of the room. The light was set up to cast a long shadow, and the nail was dropped into the shadow's head. Immediately, Subject 10 was unable to walk away from the nail, in keeping with the standard effects of SCP-272. Then the light was slowly raised, moving the shadow. The subject was dragged along as the shadow moved, as if yanked by his feet. He stumbled and had to work to regain his balance. Then the light was moved quickly. Again, the subject was dragged along with the motion of the shadow. However, due to the rapid pace of the light's motion, he was unable to keep his balance and fell to the floor, receiving scrapes, bruises, and mild road rash. Finally, in an attempt to see what might happen if the subject was unable to move even against his will, 10 was restrained. His feet were chained to the floor and a chicken wire screen was placed between him and the nail. Then the light was moved again. To the horror of the research team watching, these restraints did nothing to lessen the nail's hold on the subject. He was pulled forward violently, and the chains ripped from the floor and his body slowly forced itself through the chicken wire, landing on the other side in a pile of tiny pieces, like a potato shot through a tennis racket. No matter what is holding them down or what is in their way, a subject cannot escape the pull of their shadow or the prison of the nail. They will be bound to it, even if it kills them. Testing was temporarily suspended while a cleaning crew attended to the room, taking the rest of the day to get the bloodstains out of the concrete. The final experiment on record was conducted the following day. Subject D-272-04 was placed in the center of the room, with one stadium light casting his shadow at a 45-degree angle. The nail was dropped onto 04's shadow and he was held in place. Then the research team simply waited. Food and water was provided every few hours, as well as a bucket to use as a bathroom. For the first 2 days, the subject seemed relatively normal, if exhausted and upset. On the third day, he did not respond to food or water when it was offered. After a week had passed, the subject began to speak in rapid manic screams of what was determined to be a dead language. By day 11, the subject was switching back and forth between bursts of intense ranting and a catatonic state. Finally, after 14 days pinned to the spot by the nail, Subject 04 was set free. As soon as the nail was removed, they began speaking English again. They were severely malnourished and visibly traumatized, but immediately began to recover once freed from the nail's hold. Portions of the subject's rants were recorded and translated by Dr. Kimuro, who attempted to interview the subject on the 14th day of the study. At one point, the subject said,
"I cannot sleep. The screams are heard. I am not warm. The shadow steals."
When asked how he was feeling, the subject began to tear at the skin on his arms and shout,
"I am the prisoner of my own foolishness. Let my flesh crumble like the apple whose ashes burn at my tongue."
Not the most cheerful thing to hear, but not too out of the ordinary for a day's work at the SCP Foundation either. Following this experiment, human experimentation with SCP-272 was suspended until further notice. SCP-272 is kept in a small wooden box, hidden in a vault at Sector 25. Because nothing happens to the object as long as it is left alone, no further containment procedures are considered necessary. When the nails were moved from containment for experimentation, staff have been instructed to take extra care not to drop it. SCP-272 is considered a safe class SCP due to its inability to act on its own. It does not appear to do anything when left alone. However, there is clearly a great deal more to that little nail than meets the eye. Somehow, it is able to wreak psychic havoc on those it traps, and on anyone who might try to harm it. The more we learn about the nature of SCP-272, the more questions crop up. Where did it come from? How does it get inside people's heads? What did Subject 04 mean by the shadow steals? We may never know. But if you find yourself picking up any strange nails one of these days, make sure you don't drop them. 2 a.m., a few miles outside the city. The car tore down the asphalt at 60 miles an hour. We kept the beams low, the dark road around us only illuminated by the occasional street lamp overhead. Things moved unseen in the trees. An old song rattled off the radio. The connection was patchy, so it was interrupted by intermittent spikes of static. It was the kind of night when you knew deep down that anything could happen. You just hoped that anything would be in your favor. I rolled the window down a few minutes ago, breathing in all that cold, fresh air to stave off the looming specter of sleep. Thank God I wasn't the one driving, or things would have gotten deadly way sooner. Cops would have found us with our bumper wrapped around a tree, our heads one with the steering wheel or the windshield dead on impact, or from the unforgiving cold overnight. They might have even felt sorry for us until they found the case. Perhaps it would have been better that way. At least it would have been quick. A lot of bad things can happen on lonely state highways in the dead of night, and we were about to find out that just crashing your car was one of the more mild ones. Scott was driving. He was also the one who brokered this whole deal. I was just coming along to provide backup. There was a fully loaded Saturday night special sitting in my inner coat pocket, hoping that it wouldn't see any action tonight, and a pump-action shotgun sitting in the back in case things got really hairy. Deals like this, you either come well prepared or reckon with a heavy chance you sure as hell won't be leaving. I never asked Scott how he came into the goods currently sitting in the briefcase, and he never offered an explanation either. He only told me that he'd already secured a very interested potential buyer from a syndicate out of town. Serious people, dangerous people. They'd pay top dollar or leave us tied up in trash bags in a ditch off the side of the highway. But we both needed money, and we were willing to take that risk if it meant we could return from this deal as a pair of rich men. The terms of the deal were simple. We drive out onto a certain state highway at a little after 2 a.m. with the goods, meet the buyers at a certain rest stop along the way, and make the exchange. We'd then all go our separate ways, and if we were lucky, none of us would ever see each other ever again. Seemed simple enough, sure. Scott seemed downright chipper about the whole thing, and for a little while, I was excited too, until he told me about the road that the buyers wanted to meet us on. We'd all heard legends about the place. Superstitions, really. People think criminals are scary, but believe me, we're a surprisingly superstitious bunch. Our profession is one largely based on luck, being in the right place at the right time, and being lucky enough to avoid the cops along the way. But something you need to know, whether you're a criminal or arrows straight, is that some places are always going to be the wrong place. I'm not going to tell you which road it is. I know what you knuckleheads are like. You're curious. You're thrill seekers. Hey, we were all young once, but if I tell you what this road is, I know you're going to try to find it. Maybe you'll even decide it's worth the trip down for a pleasant Sunday drive. After what I went through on that road, I wouldn't wish a trip down it on my worst enemy. There's no other word for what we encountered there other than evil. When we were kids, we used to call it the Devil's Passage. Every spooky rumor and scary story in the book circulated about that place. Let me see what I can remember. Well, there was the Watcher in the Woods. People used to say that there was a long, tall figure with the biggest eyes you had ever seen, eyes like headlights, standing amongst the trees. If the moonlight shone in the right angle as you were driving past, you'd see it standing there, just staring at you, thinking about doing who knows what. Then there was Old Beth, the ghostly hitchhiker. People used to say they saw a strange old woman hobbling down the side of the road in the middle of the night. Sometimes people said that they could hear her crying, even if they were far enough away to make such a thing seem impossible. If you took pity on her and pulled over, asking her if she needed a ride, she'd tell you that you were a very kind person, but that she was fine and dandy walking along by herself. But if you didn't stop and offer her a lift, if you just drove away, well, local legend had it that the next time you'd see her face would be in your rearview mirror as she sat in your back seat, reaching for you with her ancient bony claws. It'd make you think twice about leaving an old woman to walk home alone in the dark. And of course, there was the lone jogger. The stories my dad told me about him always used to scare the hell out of me. He was a pale man, dressed unnaturally light for the cold winter months, jogging along the side of the road. If you looked at him, he'd look back. If your eyes ever met, the stories went that he'd start running after you. It wouldn't matter how fast you drove, he'd somehow always catch up and stare at you through the glass of your car's windows. He never hurt anyone directly, but I imagine he probably caused a heart attack or two in his time, if he ever really existed. But all of these things were nothing, I repeat, nothing, compared to the Phantom Cruiser. You have to drive cautiously at night, cause if you didn't, you might find a ghostly 1970s police cruiser tailgating you, and that'd be the worst thing you ever saw. There were fewer stories about this one than all the others, because if you ever ran afoul of the Phantom Cruiser, chances are that you wouldn't survive to tell people about what happened to you. Though people could still make an educated guess about what happened to you based on whatever was left behind. Here's a not-so-fun fact. The Devil's Passage is technically qualified for one of the most dangerous highways in the country, from crashes to hitchhiker murders to unexplained deaths on the side of the road. Since 1974, this road has been an incredibly unpleasant place to drive. Every time I saw another horror story about a strange death on the road, I'd think of the Phantom Cruiser, and it was those same thoughts polluting my brain that night. As Scott drove the two of us to the rest stop halfway down the Devil's Passage, I only realized I'd dozed off when he nudged me awake, and the blurry lights of distant street lamps flashed into my field of vision. "Look alive," he said. "We're here." The rest stop wasn't much to look at. All that there was an abandoned gas station, really the perfect place for this kind of illicit deal. My hand moved instinctively to the special in my coat and clicked back the hammer. Something about this whole setup wasn't right. Sting operation, police ambush, this whole thing reeked of a deal too good to be true. My instincts turned out to be right, in a sense, just not the way I was expecting. As we turned into the rest stop, Scott turned up his beams. All we saw was carnage waiting for us. A car, presumably one that once belonged to our prospective buyers, in a state of horrific disarray. It looked as though a train had impacted the side of the vehicle, completely caving it in. The metal was covered in deep scratches and ruts that almost looked like claw marks. It had been eviscerated. Scott broke hard, and we both got out of the car. I drew the special out of my jacket, and he grabbed the shotgun out of the back seat. We approached with caution, worrying this might just be another part of the setup, until we saw the thick puddle of blood congealing under the driver's side door. We drew closer, propelled by morbid curiosity. Was it a hit from a rival gang looking to intercept the deal? Seemed logical, but there were no bullet holes in the car. Just ripping, tearing, and massive impact damage. Scott shined the light of his phone into the destroyed car, and I vomited when I saw what was inside. The buyers looked less like people and more like 2 sacks of pulled pork in tattered clothes. If I hadn't seen them inside the car, I wouldn't have even guessed they were human, and the damage wasn't just to them. The upholstery was torn up and burned. with violent symbols carved into the walls and scrawled onto the cracked windows in blood. When I turned to Scott, he was ghost white, clutching his phone and shotgun with trembling hands. We didn't exchange a word, but we both knew it was time to leave. We could find another buyer. There'd be other opportunities, other deals. But lives? You only get one. And we both silently acknowledged that if we stuck around here much longer, we wouldn't even have that. We sped back into the car and locked the doors behind us, for whatever good that would do, considering the damage that had been done to the buyers and their car. Perhaps we just needed the illusion of security to get us the hell out of there. The car pulled out of the rest stop at breakneck speed. Scott floored it, trying to put some good distance between us and the horror at that rest stop. Whatever had happened to the buyers, we didn't fancy sharing that same awful fate. My heart dropped down to my guts when I heard the sirens and flashing lights behind us. After all this, we'd been busted for speeding. They'd pull us over and find the guns and the briefcase in the car, and they'd have a lot of questions that neither of us would have good answers to. We didn't know whether to slow down and hope for the best or speed up and take this boy in blue on a genuine car chase. This whole thing couldn't have gone more wrong. But my thoughts soon drifted from getting used to the taste of prison food to something altogether more sinister. When I saw the car getting closer in the rearview mirror, I realized that this wasn't a modern cop car tailing us. It was a beat-up old 70s cruiser, traveling at insane speeds, gaining on us. The high beams cut through me like razor blades. I heard the radio crackle into life, even though neither I nor Scott touched it. It wasn't music, just a hoarse, scratchy voice repeating the word, "Run," again and again. And seeing as whatever was behind us clearly wasn't a real cop, we were more than happy to oblige that request. Scott hit the gas like our lives depended on it, which, to be fair, they did. But no matter how fast we sped up, the cruiser kept getting closer, like a demon on our tail. I screamed at Scott to go faster, but we were going as fast as we could. Next thing I knew, the Phantom Cruiser collided with the backside of our car and sent us into a spin, showering the two of us with broken glass crystals as the tires screeched across the asphalt. It felt like an eternity before the car came to a rest, and at that moment, the Phantom Cruiser stopped too. Someone got out. He was dressed like a cop. He even looked like a cop. A dude in his 40s, balding, overweight, with a handlebar mustache. But something was wrong about him. He didn't say a word as he approached the car, and he didn't seem to register me sliding the special out of my jacket either. He was inches away from Scott's window when I panicked and opened fire, sending a hail of small caliber rounds into his gut. He stumbled back slightly, as though shocked, and then everything got a whole lot worse. The cop let out the most awful bellow, not of pain, but of pure rage. Something happened to his face. His eyes started to glow a bright, hellish red, and his jaw began to extend until he looked like a Munch painting. There were no teeth in there, just an infinite black void. He grabbed a dazed Scott through the window, pulling him into a brutal headlock and dragging him out of the car, releasing those deranged bellows the entire time. Scott screamed and pleaded for help. I grabbed his body and tried to pull him back, but the cop was inhumanly strong. He just kept pulling until he was all the way out, thrashing on the asphalt. I don't want to tell you what he did next. Wouldn't be right. But suffice to say, I couldn't save Scott, and I definitely didn't want it happening to me. While he was working on Scott, I scrambled into the driver's seat and floored it, hoping that Scott would at least buy me some time. I was weeping in terror as I drove away into the dark, leaving my friend to a horrible fate with the driver of the Phantom Cruiser. So you can only imagine how I felt when a few minutes later, I heard the sirens again and saw the bright lights getting closer behind me. Run, run, run!
SCP-682 must be destroyed as soon as possible. So begins the SCP Foundation file on the dreaded SCP-682, a highly intelligent reptilian monster that has, despite the Foundation's best efforts, proved impossible to kill. It may not be the most dangerous SCP out there, considering that some are capable of eliminating entire realities, but it's one of the most iconic. And you've probably heard tales of the monster that death forgot, and you know exactly why everyone is so afraid of the so-called hard-to-kill reptile. It's been subjected to some of the most deadly weapons and traps the Foundation could devise, and survived attacks from some of its deadliest fellow SCPs. But before we tell you about the Foundation's many failed assassination attempts against the so-called hard-to-kill reptile, we need a little more groundwork on what this creature even is. The first thing to know about SCP-682 is that this thing wants you and everything you know dead. Unlike some other creatures like SCP-096 and SCP-173, which are murderous but exhibit no real higher processing skills, SCP-682 possesses cunning, advanced reasoning, and even human-level logical intelligence. SCP-682 can engage you in conversation, but just talking to the creature calmly and cordially will sometimes cause it to enter its rage state, where it becomes even more dangerous and volatile. The beast is perpetually kept in a tank of powerful hydrochloric acid, melting its tissue to prevent it from reaching its full potential and going on a rampage. The creature's most terrifying asset, and the reason it's proven impossible to terminate thus far, is its incredible adaptability to any and all external stimuli. 682 is a reactive being, capable of not only surviving and regenerating from all attacks, but often incorporating those attacks into its own wide arsenal. In other words, if you're hoping to kill this thing, you better kill it on the first hit. Because if you don't, you better believe it's gonna hit you back 100 times harder. This brings us to the main event. Some of the SCP Foundation's most ambitious and frightening attempts to terminate SCP-682, or even understand how it could theoretically be terminated. There are quite literally too many unsuccessful attempts for us to list them all here, so think of this as a highlight reel of the Foundation's most prominent failures. 682 was first cross-tested with SCP-017, a humanoid shadow entity shown to be able to consume matter with its shadows and leave no traces behind. Tests on tissue samples from 682 showed that SCP-017 was able to consume said tissues with no adverse effects. However, when SCP-017 was placed into the containment chamber with the actual creature, 682 let out a horrific roar that was so loud it damaged nearby audio equipment. SCP-017 fled to the corner of the room, and 682, in its rage state, attempted to breach containment. Agents managed to suppress and remove the creature, but no meaningful damage was logged. Attempt failed. SCP-173, the killer statue, was later brought in, hoping that its thus far impeccable track record for killing would hold strong. The second that 173 was introduced into the testing area, 682 retreated to the far wall and began screeching intensely. It was intelligent enough to know what it was dealing with here. While the researchers and guards expected an instantaneous reaction, there was actually a stalemate for over 6 hours, as 682 stared at 173 continuously. Eventually, the tie was broken when agents shot out 682's eyes with high-caliber sniper rifles, breaking the line of sight and causing 173 to attack. Though 682 sustained damage to several parts of its body, while its eyes regenerated, the creature was not killed. It then regenerated a number of eyes all over its body, covered in a clear armored carapace that made them resistant to bullets. The stalemate continued for an additional 12 hours as 682 maintained perpetual eye contact. 173 was eventually removed from the containment unit, and the mission was aborted. Attempt failed. In their desperation, the SCP Foundation restored to bringing in another dangerous and seemingly unkillable monster to take on 682. SCP-096, also known as the Shy Guy. As astute SCP fans will already know, this being kills anything that sees its face, with no known exceptions, and when it enters its attack mode, it's thought to be quite literally unstoppable. Or at least, it was. While SCP-096 was able to destroy 85% of 682's original body mass during their 27-hour battle, it was left mentally broken, wounded, and huddled in the corner. To this day, if ever confronted with SCP-682, the Shy Guy reacts in pure terror, turning away and clawing at its own face. Attempt failed. During a deadly containment breach, SCP-682 also went head-to-head organically with another iconic SCP Hall of Famer, SCP-106, also known as the Old Man. The Old Man and a shape-shifting psionic anomaly known as SCP-953 broke into 682's containment cell. The Old Man pulled both of his fellow anomalous combatants into his pocket dimension to continue the battle on his terms. However, despite losing 67% of his body mass during the ensuing pocket dimension showdown, 682 still prevailed, with the Old Man eventually fleeing back to his cell and 953 being collected and taken away by agents. Once again, SCP-682 continued to hold the title. But it wasn't just cross-testing experiments, intentional or otherwise. The SCP Foundation's quest to kill 682 led them to a number of more conventional murder methods, all with varying degrees of success. Due to SCP-682's highly adaptive abilities, some methods were discounted from the outset. For example, launching a powerful thermonuclear missile at the creature was soundly rejected by O5 Command, on the premise that if the creature wasn't destroyed and evolved to the point where it could shrug off nukes, humanity would be pretty much done for. Other ideas were abandoned just for being too ridiculous, such as one researcher's suggestion to fly the creature through the air and drop it from a considerable height, hoping to kill it with a high-altitude impact. I'm not sure we even need to tell you why that's a terrible idea, but during the experiments on SCP-682, the studies range from honest to incompetent to straight-up evil. One guest researcher fed 2 small innocent children to the creature just to see what would happen. He was then himself fed to the creature for his sadistic behavior, which was viewed as getting in the way of his professional conduct. After all, the Foundation is meant to be cold, not cruel. It was SCP-682 that had the monopoly on cruelty. Memetic kill agents were a resounding failure. They attempted to dismember 682 with a powerful laser, only to have the creature develop reflective surfaces that displaced the beam and caused catastrophic damage to the area around it. They attempted to kill the creature by sucking all the air out of its containment facility and create a vacuum, but it expelled a dangerous gaseous compound that reacted violently and exploded when air was once again introduced into the room. The Foundation used high-precision blades to slice SCP-682 into approximately 12,000 pieces, then separated these pieces. Unsurprisingly, by this point, this attempt also failed. The 12,000 pieces reformed a short while later into the fully operational killing machine we all know and fear. In one particularly frightening display of intelligence and adaptability, the Foundation attempted to kill 682 with extreme heat, but it shielded itself by developing a second carapace composed of solid helium. When personnel entered the room following the failed attempt on the creature's life, it shattered its helium carapace into deadly shards that fired around the room and shredded all Foundation personnel in attendance. It had set a trap, and that trap had been wildly successful. The creature's ability to adapt to seemingly any offense is unparalleled, to the point where Foundation staff have no idea how to classify this creature, whether it's organic, inorganic, or even alive at all based on any definitions we could understand. At every turn, the creature just raised more questions. What is it? Is it possible to destroy it at all by any means? Who was even trying to kill who here? Because it certainly seemed like SCP-682 had a masterful KD ratio by now. More extreme feats of cross-testing continued in the Foundation's growing desperation to eliminate this monster. SCP-162, which is a hypnotic ball of sharp objects, hooks, and high-tension fishing line, was introduced to 682's containment cell. The hooks latched onto the creature and tore huge portions off, including its entire lower jaw and one of its limbs. However, 682 was still able to breach containment, kill 11 people, and badly wound 86 others. It regenerated its severe injuries in no time. The beast was even taken to the domain of the Gate Guardian, one of the proposals for SCP-001. The Guardian had a flaming sword hotter than the sun, capable of destroying its targets on an atomic level. Naturally, SCP-682 survived and regenerated. Perhaps the most fascinating cross-test of all was between 682 and SCP-053, who manifests as a kind, innocent little girl with the unfortunate condition of causing homicidal tendencies in all who come into contact with her for more than 10 minutes. The people with these tendencies would then attempt to harm the girl, but would immediately drop dead shortly after, leaving the girl intact. The researchers present anticipated 2 possible outcomes here. The optimistic outcome, in which 682 enters a rage state, attacks 053, and died for good, and the realistic outcome, in which 682 attacks 053, possibly experiencing some minor injury or nothing at all, and 053 had to be removed from the containment cell. But that didn't happen. What did occur was considerably more shocking than any kind of violence. When 053 entered 682's containment chamber, the monster became uncharacteristically docile. Researchers and staff were baffled and watched with amazement as 053 approached the terrifying, immortal, mass-murdering monster and began to play with it. 682 even allowed 053 to draw on its face with crayons. Researchers thought they must have been dreaming, seeing this surreal display play out. 053 even appeared to have affection for this unkillable misanthrope. It was a single act in defiance of everything they thought they knew. When Foundation personnel entered the containment cell to separate the two, 682 went ballistic and killed multiple guards. 053 also wept, sad at being separated from her new friend. To this day, despite further testing, the Foundation has no idea how or why this happened. Like many details surrounding SCP-682, it's shrouded in deeply frustrating mystery. And so the tale of SCP-682 continues, in spite of the Foundation's best efforts. The monster continues to breach containment and slaughter with some regularity, taking out its seemingly limitless hatred for not only human beings, but anything that dares draw breath. Nobody knows where exactly the creature is from, what its true nature is, or why its ability to adapt and regenerate far exceeds any known organism on this planet. Perhaps one day, through enough research and cross-testing, we can someday answer these questions with scientific precision. But until then, we only have one answer. Hatred never dies.
The SCP Foundation is no stranger to pure evil. Whether it's a reptile that wants to end all life, a sadistic old man with his own torture dimension, or the personification of death itself lurking beyond a limestone cavern. But what if there was something even worse out there? The embodiment of chaos and cruelty, existing across multiple realities and dimensions. And what if it was coming for us? This is the Scarlet King, believed by many to be the ultimate evil behind much of the trouble the Foundation has faced, and some even speculate that fighting him was the reason the Foundation was created in the first place. But what exactly is the Scarlet King? He's known by many names, almost always including some allusion to the color red, and then a reference to royalty or power. Harak, Kaharak, the Red Shah, the Crimson Khan, PTE 616 Mendez Ex Machina, the Laha Raja, and, of course, SCP-001, to name a few. And like many of the Foundation's mysterious enemies, stories about his true nature and origins abound and are often contradictory. According to the official SCP-001 files of Tufto's proposal, symbology of the Scarlet King has existed in multiple cultures throughout history, with the king often depicted the same way, as a huge red demonic figure, often wearing a gold crown or other headdress indicating royalty. He shows up looking similarly within different cultures' mythologies, despite existing at different points in history or them not having the means to communicate with one another. A number of entities that the SCP Foundation is familiar with are believed to be somehow connected to the Scarlet King, including SCP-2317, a wooden door leading to the realm of a being known as the Devourer, who's expected to escape and cause an apocalyptic event in the next 30 years. But really, there's no way of knowing just how many SCPs are directly connected to the Scarlet King. Strangely, the Foundation's official file on the Scarlet King once designated his containment class as Keter, but that has since been downgraded to Safe. According to the file, any attempt to change this designation is likely to lead to horrifying results. It is widely known that the Scarlet King still has considerable influence over a number of groups, individuals, and anomalies in our universe. And if ever he made his way into our universe, it would likely lead to the irreversible damage of reality itself. So then why Safe? And why are the O5 Council so adamant that it remain that way? Getting to the bottom of this mystery is exactly why we're here today. But to fully grasp the true nature of the Scarlet King, we must first understand the man whose life and fate have always been tied to it, Dr. Robert Montauk. If that name feels oddly familiar to you, it's because of its association with one of the Scarlet King's most recent attempts to enter our reality, SCP-231. This SCP, often referred to as the Brides of the Scarlet King, was formed of 7 women. 7, by the way, being an extremely significant number for the king, all kidnapped by the most recent in a long line of the king's devoted cults known as the Children of the Scarlet King. Each of these 7 unfortunate women were impregnated with anomalous horrors, such as the infamous SCP-682, and every time one of these horrors were birthed, a catastrophe occurred and the mother died. At the time, Dr. Montauk was a prominent researcher studying this anomaly, and as 6 catastrophes had already occurred, pressure was mounting to figure out a way to prevent the final birth. But as he was working on the issue, Dr. Montauk was struck with a personal tragedy, the mysterious disappearance of his 14-year-old brother Jacob. In his fear and anger, Montauk believed that this must have something to do with the Scarlet King and his disciples. Wanting revenge, Montauk proposed an idea so horrifying that the details were never made public. A procedure known as 110 Montauk, to be performed on the final bride at regular intervals. However, this wasn't the end of Dr. Montauk's fraught relationship with the Scarlet King. It was just the beginning. To give you some perspective on just how dangerous the Scarlet King is, the SCP Foundation and the Global Occult Coalition decided to put aside their differences and form a joint effort to stamp out the children of the Scarlet King. They were successful in this mission, and even managed to capture the children's leader, a mysterious man named Depeche Spivak. Dr. Montauk, who became the lead researcher on 231 and 2317, was naturally the first choice for interviewing Depeche about the true nature of the children and of the Scarlet King. Dr. Montauk could never be the impartial interviewer that the SCP Foundation wanted, though. The suspicion that the Scarlet King or the children had something to do with the loss of his younger brother still lingered just beneath the surface. Like a lot of cult leaders, Depeche was extremely cryptic in his answers to Dr. Montauk's questioning. He'd already heard of the doctor from the reputation of the horrifying Montauk procedure, and was surprised to see him so calm and courteous in person. A few key facts about the king and his cult were revealed in the first few rounds of questioning. The children had once worked with the Serpent's Hand before being excommunicated for their allegiance to the king, and they had stolen sacred texts from the mystical Wanderer's Library to assist in their summoning rituals. Depeche also revealed that the Scarlet King is bound by 3 laws: the law of blood, the law of concrete, and the law of howling. Dr. Montauk, confused and frustrated by Depeche's secrecy, had to learn more. He found an old memoir from a former member of the Children of the Scarlet King, Jack Hirsch, who had the ability to invade the minds of people from the past and experience what they experienced. He recounted a battle between the Scarlet King and his followers, and a group of time-traveling Turkmen warriors from SCP-3838. Hirsch saw both sides of the battle. From the perspective of the Children of the Scarlet King, their lord ruled over them from an immense fortress embedded in a volcano. From the perspective of the Turkmen, the children were starved and beaten peasants, commanded by the king's voice in the roaring howl of the wind. Montauk also found extensive records of summoning rituals performed by various Scarlet King-aligned cults. Interestingly, some of them incorporated the use of carved SCP Foundation symbols. What could this mean? Montauk returned again to Depeche, who finally gave him the truth about the law of blood. This is the law of the Scarlet King. It's defined by poverty, violence, starvation, hate, and most of all, fear. Like the serfs in the Middle Ages, persecuted by and subjected to violence from the nobles. To the Children of the Scarlet King, this sense of holy pain and awe is the only way to live. The alternative is the law of concrete, which means the modern age defined by empty safety and false comfort. Buildings, easy-to-access food, healthcare, knowledge, technology. This is everything that the Scarlet King despises. But the mystery only deepened as Montauk found files from a former Foundation operative by the name of Agent de Beauvoir. Montauk learned that the Scarlet King didn't seem to appear until after the Foundation was created. And in fact, it seemed that the greater interest the Foundation took in the Scarlet King, the more powerful he became. How could this be? Things were also getting stranger on a personal level for Dr. Montauk. Depeche repeatedly pressed him about his brother's disappearance and the Montauk procedure during the interviews. Little by little, it was beginning to take its toll. The questions still plagued him. What was the law of howling? Who or what really is the Scarlet King? How did he come to be? Montauk's search was causing him to act more like the Children of the Scarlet King, ranting about the horrors of the modern world. How all of us are living a lie,
how the only honest way to live is suffering under the dominion of the Scarlet King. This philosophy is summed up in the words of one cultist named Ariadne Cartwright, who said, "We must learn what it is to die, to be enslaved, truly, brutally enslaved, with no compassion or compunction from our masters. We must learn what it is to be taken towards a single purpose, to know and truly understand our lack of agency. We must be beholden to the words of gods and darkness, the tempest-tossed refuse of a race of fools. We must kill modernity, postmodernity, with all its analysis and sneering observation. There is only one rule, the rule of chaos, for humanity, for life, for the Scarlet King." Basically, anytime humanity tries to exert control over the world, the Scarlet King gets stronger. Every time they try to understand or organize or categorize their world, the Scarlet King gets stronger. As colonial and imperial powers conquered and invaded lands like India, Africa, and South America, and subjugated their beliefs under Western ideas, the Scarlet King grew stronger. Montauk was beginning to truly understand the power of his enemy here, and even worse, he was starting to understand his part in it. Montauk, slowly being driven mad by the knowledge he was gaining, realized that the Scarlet King's greatest enemy, the SCP Foundation, was also its greatest asset. Every time they tried to understand the monster, to give him some kind of comprehensible form, they only made him more powerful. Just in time with Montauk's new revelation, a red crack appeared in the wall of Depeche Spivak's containment cell, a portal to the realm of the Scarlet King. Foundation staff found they were unable to enter the cell, and Depeche demanded a final interview with Montauk. With no other options, the Foundation relented. In their very last conversation, Depeche congratulated Montauk for finally understanding what he was dealing with. The Scarlet King, Depeche told him, is an idea, a concept. He is a being given power through the conflict between the old and the new. This is the law of the Howling. The Scarlet King's endless rage at the direction the world and humanity has taken. The King, according to Depeche, hated the Foundation's belief that science and rationality was the true path to progress. The King saw this as little more than petty arrogance. The reason Montauk's procedure on the final bride of the Scarlet King was so effective was because it wasn't born out of science. It was born out of hate, pain, the desire for revenge, and in the Scarlet King's realm, that would be all there is. Unless our world, and especially the Foundation, changed its course, the Scarlet King's rise to absolute power would be inevitable. Montauk, his mind practically gone, asked one last question. Did the children or the Scarlet King take his brother, Jacob? When Depeche told him the answer, no. And in response, Montauk shot him dead, finally bringing an end to the children of the Scarlet King. In light of his new revelations, Montauk begged the O5 Council to change their ways in order to avoid letting the Scarlet King break into our reality. They refused, saying Montauk's ideas were too radical. But they knew they couldn't just ignore the threat posed by the Scarlet King. They would have to take some steps. And so the O5 Council of the SCP Foundation, the most powerful and secretive group in the entire world, in order to prevent the most dangerous threat that humanity has ever known from breaking into our reality and enslaving all the people of the world, finally did something. They changed the classification of the Scarlet King from Keter to safe, and made its description on the official Foundation files deliberately vague. The O5 Council thinks this will be enough to stop the Scarlet King's power from continuing to grow, but Montauk knew it wasn't enough. He had seen the truth, and he couldn't unsee it. While the Foundation was going on as normal, Montauk grew to despise them. He knew the Scarlet King was coming. He knew that he couldn't be stopped, and that our whole reality was little more than sitting ducks. Dr. Robert Montauk is no longer a researcher for the SCP Foundation. No, Dr. Robert Montauk chose a different path. He's now a child of the Scarlet King, a devotee of madness, hate, and chaos. You can't beat the Scarlet King after all, and as the old adage goes, if you can't beat him, join him. Ask yourself a simple question. Is the world around you real? It seems like the answer should be pretty obvious. Of course the world as you know it is real. How else would you be able to interact with it? Perhaps a better question would be this. How much do you trust that the world you know is real? How much do you believe that reality, as you experience it, is constant and cannot be changed by external forces? Now imagine, if you can, an entity to which the very fabric of reality is like clay, able to be shaped and molded at will. Then imagine that this entity, this malicious, twisted, and unknowable horror, has taken a special interest in you. If you can picture such a scenario, then you may as well be standing in the shoes of James Talleyrand, a Foundation researcher assigned to SCP-3999. Talleyrand could only have imagined what the Foundation kept contained in an airtight cell all the way at the bottom of a kilometer-long shaft, and never expected that this was where his lifeless body would be found. Despite having the entity contained, the Foundation's only knowledge of SCP-3999 came from a text document discovered on Talleyrand's phone after his demise. Even their own records indicated that no such creature ever existed. Why? What could possibly shape reality in such a way that it could hide its own existence from the Foundation? And where was it now? The document on Talleyrand's phone yielded some evidence, seeming to be a long, rambling, and confused account of some sort of battle between a reality-shaping entity and the ill-fated researcher sent to examine it. Unlike many of the Foundation's documents, the entry for SCP-3999 is riddled with contradictions and strike-throughs, a confusing mess of information that makes piecing together the mysteries of Talleyrand's fate all the more difficult. Beneath the strange formatting and uncertainty surrounding SCP-3999 lies the tale of one man's torture for the amusement of an impossibly powerful and eternally sadistic creature. Based on the information available, it appears that SCP-3999 was fixated on Talleyrand. Upon his arrival to the entity's cell, the researcher had no idea how long he would spend in the company of SCP-3999, or that he would never emerge alive. Many SCPs contained by the Foundation require their own specially made prisons in order to hold them and maintain the safety of Foundation staff as well as the outside world. But imagine if an SCP could turn the tables, bending the world around a single member of the Foundation, using all of reality as their own personalized torture chamber. The list of horrors endured by Talleyrand is both exhaustive and incomplete, given the length of time he spent with the creature. Shortly after James Talleyrand was assigned to Site-11A, where SCP-3999 was contained, the entity was somehow able to breach containment and began to twist the world around it in the name of a singular, cruel objective: the torture of James Talleyrand. The creature, while having no physical description, possessed the capability to cause either a CK-class reality restructuring event or a ZK-class end-of-reality event. SCP-3999 was somehow able to both destroy reality itself while simultaneously rebuilding it around its prisoner, Researcher Talleyrand. Every creature, person, and machination that SCP-3999 created was done so with the express intention of making Talleyrand suffer horribly, over the course of millions of years, according to the researcher's own writings. The exact details of how SCP-3999 tortured Talleyrand are littered throughout the document he was found with, but it is apparent that the entity was able to use its reality-altering abilities to continually revive the man after killing him as a way to prolong his pain. SCP-3999 seemed to be able to use its powers however it pleased, but focused all its attention and actions on causing misery for one man. It simply enjoyed inflicting suffering. One of the examples of the atrocities James Talleyrand suffered at the mercy of a cold, remorseless creature was witnessing the deaths of others. Although they were constructed and controlled by SCP-3999, Talleyrand saw trained Foundation security personnel drag 3 people into the cell. He recognized them instantly as his own family. Talleyrand was made to watch as his mother, father, and sister
were executed with a single gunshot to the head by members of the same organization that he was a part of. All of Talleyrand's professional colleagues were also killed in front of him, followed by anyone and everyone that had come into contact with James Talleyrand, including the O5 Council. He was made to watch as they were systematically murdered one by one, all for the enjoyment of SCP-3999. At some point during the creature's torture of Talleyrand, there appears to have been some attempt to contain SCP-3999 within another SCP, SCP-2432, a room within a hotel now owned by the Foundation that appears to compel its guests to write exaggerated positive reviews after staying there. When introduced to SCP-2432, SCP-3999's ability to alter reality seemed to have the effect of creating a dimensional anomaly within the hotel. A crawlspace opened up in SCP-2432, leading to an almost identical room. The front door of this new room, designated SCP-2432-1, led to an alternate dimension that resembled the hotel housing SCP-2432. The rooms of this new version of the SCP-2432 hotel were a seemingly infinite, endless loop of rooms. This dimension also played host to a number of strange creatures, as uncovered by Foundation research teams that ventured there. Most notably, a creature resembling a male Homo sapien, calling itself Researcher Talleyrand. This being was dressed in clothing similar to Foundation researchers and appeared nervous and confused when approached by personnel, only to be executed when asked to be told the location of SCP-3999. Later during SCP-3999's 3 million year torture session, James Talleyrand was interviewed with another doctor working for the Foundation. The interviewing doctor had no recollection of Talleyrand's assignment to SCP-3999, and both James's involvement with the Foundation and the very existence of SCP-3999 were expunged from the Foundation's database. As Talleyrand desperately tried to rationalize what was happening to him, he told the interviewer, "I have trouble focusing on things now. I just feel a lot of unease. It's like reality has started to feel less real, if that makes sense." Shortly after, he attempted to ask the doctor for his name and for him to identify which of the Foundation sites they were at. In response, the doctor emitted a strange noise from his mouth, confusing Talleyrand. "That's not a name. You just made a noise with your mouth," the researcher replied. "Why am I thinking of redactions? How can a word be redacted like that in a normal conversation?" Following this, the floor beneath James Talleyrand's feet disappeared, and he was swallowed by darkness, as SCP-3999 continued bending reality to make him suffer. What followed were multiple failed attempts from Talleyrand to either escape from the entity or nullify its abilities to warp reality. SCP-3999 had, at a later point, trapped Talleyrand in a stage play version of its cell. As James frantically tried to escape out of a nearby door, where he hoped to find reality, he was met with a solid wall. "I'm trapped in whatever this place is with this thing, and there's no outside reality anymore," he realized. Researcher Talleyrand tried to understand the entity, but SCP-3999 defied description. It was simply chaos. In his desperation, Talleyrand was able to dig a tiny hole in the floor through which he could see a light. Filled with thoughts of his beloved family, his colleagues, and the rest of the world that had once existed, he opened the hole wider. It is unclear what happened after this, but it is apparent that James Talleyrand was still unable to escape SCP-3999. However, as the situations he found himself in grew increasingly strange, James Talleyrand was able to take greater control of his predicament. This is evidenced in the Foundation's document regarding SCP-3999. Researcher Talleyrand cannot be contained by this. Researcher Talleyrand will fight his way back. Researcher Talleyrand will recontain SCP-3999. This torture had gone on long enough, and researcher James Talleyrand was determined to be free of the creature that had taken such sick pleasure in his pain. Talleyrand at one point was able to subdue SCP-3999, although it is initially unclear how he accomplished this. There were several attempts made to contain the entity, using a recursive joke, a melon, the graves of American crime novelist Robert B. Parker, or an O5 Council member, and a roach motel. It is believed that every single one of these attempts failed. Attempting to beat the creature at its own game, Talleyrand tried to turn SCP-3999's reality-altering powers against it by imagining the entity as something easier to subdue.
These included several moldy blankets, a murderous penguin, and a pillow. Eventually, Talleyrand was able to contain SCP-3999 with the aid of 48 trained containment personnel, all of whom were also researcher Talleyrand. During this time, a conversation between the two were partially recorded, although any dialogue from SCP-3999 suffered from data corruption. Claiming to finally be in charge and in control of the situation, Talleyrand interrogated SCP-3999, berating the creature for keeping him prisoner. "You can't frighten me anymore. For the first million years of nonsensical containment procedures and tortures and dream logic, it was the worst pain I had ever felt, but I survived. For the second million years, it was still the hardest thing I had ever done, but I survived. By the third million years, I was growing numb." The researcher tried to ascertain the exact nature and origin of SCP-3999, but to no avail. Vowing to fight the entity, Talleyrand told it, "Here's the thing about horror and weirdness. The more you reveal of it, the less effect it has. I am sick of your horror. I am sick of you." Afterwards, he was melted into goo for 5 years. It appears that shortly after this, researcher Talleyrand managed to understand how to destroy SCP-3999. While the entity was immortal and virtually unstoppable, he realized its weakness, that it had to bond to another being in order to survive. Upon discovering this, Talleyrand took his own life, causing all that SCP-3999 had done to disappear. After Foundation researcher James Talleyrand committed suicide, reality reverted to its original state, before SCP-3999 had heavily altered it. His death freeing reality from the evil entity once and for all. The Foundation remains unaware of what SCP-3999 was or indeed is, and one can only guess as to why the entity subjugated Talleyrand to such terror and horror. What made this powerful reality bender hold such a perverse fixation on one man? Some have likened the creature to a horror writer, continually subjugating a character to all manner of nightmares before deciding to redraft and try something new. Whatever it was, SCP-3999 carries with it a warning that reality isn't always as it seems. It was 1965, and the Chicago PD was investigating a meatpacking plant reported to be the home of a devil-worshipping cult, complete with allegations of human sacrifice. There, the cops were met with heavy resistance. A firefight broke out between the police and the occult worshippers who flooded out of the plant's basement. The cops were pinned down and in trouble, but they had a secret weapon, heavily armed and decked out in sophisticated ballistic armor and covered in strange insignia. Mobile Task Force Epsilon 9, also known as the Fire Eaters, here to assist the cops on behalf of the SCP Foundation. As always with the Foundation, they had no interest in some mere human cultists. Those were a dime a dozen in the world of anomalous monsters. What the Foundation had taken an interest in was who or what these cultists were worshipping. It all begun a few weeks back, near Danforth Meatpacking, an abandoned meatpacking plant just outside of Chicago. No one had given the place a thought in decades, that is, until people started going missing. Rumors spread of people being snatched in the surrounding woods by figures dressed in robes. Mysterious voices and noises were said to be coming out from the cavernous belly of the plant. Some even reported seeing smoke rising out of the building. Thick, black, noxious smoke. Something was terribly wrong here. Something was anomalous. The Chicago Police Department Strike Force, in association with the Fire Eaters from the Foundation, mobilized at Danforth Meatpacking. While the police were initially reluctant to work with these mysterious figures, they turned out to be indispensable for the raid. There were 47 cultists holding out in the basement of the plant, many of them heavily armed and all of them hopped up on zealous devotion to their unknown master. All except one of the cultists fought to the death during a tense firefight with Chicago PD and the Fire Eaters. The single survivor was still heavily injured and was taken to a secure Foundation facility for emergency treatment and debriefing. Typically, the Foundation would need to perform extensive tests on the Danforth meatpacking plant to discover the source of the Anomalies' activity. However, this time, it was a Chicago detective who asked the question that busted the case wide open. The hell's with the giant pig? And while it would turn out to be a whole lot more than that, there was indeed a giant iron furnace shaped like a pig in the center of the facility. Measuring 15 meters by 25 meters by 20 meters at its widest points, the thing was a behemoth. It had an internal furnace despite no apparent fuel source, and a 5-centimeter slot of unknown purpose on the side of the machine's immense rusted hide. Naturally, all the police officers involved in the raid had their memories wiped and restructured, and they were lucky, because they'd remain forever ignorant of the true horrors about to unfold in the confines of that godforsaken factory. As is standard procedure, the plant was isolated, and a Foundation research team, led by lead researcher Westrin, under the authority of Regional Director Caleb, was installed on the new provisional site to conduct tests. Other than everyone feeling somewhat uneasy around it, this new anomaly, dubbed SCP-4511, didn't seem to exhibit any strange activities save for its perpetually burning fire. But during the initial research period, a small white card suddenly popped out of the slot in SCP-4511's side. A researcher carefully approached and looked at the card. There was writing. It said, "Current demand, a flock of my own, satisfied." Though nobody on the team had any idea what this meant. After going through a shootout with a considerable death toll to get to it, having a giant metal pig-shaped furnace spit out a cryptic card was strange. But at the secret medical facility where the surviving cultist was being held, things were about to get a whole lot stranger. As he lay in a bed suffering from his injuries, he pulled one of the medical staff close and uttered cryptic, dying words. "Give whatever it demands, or your suffering will be beyond measure." He expired seconds later, less than 72 hours after the raid. Back at the meatpacking plant, at the exact same time, another white card was produced by the machine, reading, "Current demand, the metal teeth that endlessly churn. Period. 1 week." Perhaps this entity was a little more intelligent than they thought. A number of researchers on the team, invigorated by this new development, were eager to press forward with experiments. Lead researcher Westrin, however, did not share their enthusiasm. Something about this entire situation felt like a grim omen to him. This entity had a plan far beyond their understanding, and on some deep animal level, he knew that helping this thing see its plans through would lead to disastrous results. On this first gut impulse, he denied the request for further experiments, but Regional Director Caleb had other ideas. Caleb overruled Westrin's command, and the experiments began shortly after. The entity, jokingly nicknamed the Swine God by researchers, had made its demand. The metal teeth that endlessly churn. But what could that mean? It wasn't long before the entity began to produce more cards, each with their own strange and esoteric demands. However, on some instinctual level, the researchers at the site understood the demands perfectly. The next card's demand was, "The metal of this suffocating prison." Upon receiving this demand, researchers collected scrap metal from around the new site and tossed them into the furnace beyond the swine god's jaws one by one. Inside, they heard the sound of metal crunching. Hours later, all the other metal in the site began to rapidly oxidize and rust, though SCP-4511 itself remained unaffected. The card that came after delivered another simple request. "Oil to slicken my frozen joints." The researchers understood and procured 3 large barrels of oil and tossed them into the furnace. The entity let out a deep gurgle before shaking violently and expelling excess oil, rusted metal, and 2 domesticated pig femurs. It turns out that the swine god had an appetite for pigs, as the next card that rumbled out of the machine bore the request, "2 of my children, made in my image, made in flesh." In response, the researchers provided the entity with 2 adult pigs. Just like the previous requests, they too were tossed into the fiery depths of the giant pig's mouth, from which came the horrible sounds of pigs squealing, and then a low, guttural gurgling. Next, the request was, "The hooks used to hang my children's corpses." To satisfy this request, the researchers provided 17 meat hooks. In response, 4511 spat out a metal sphere at an extremely high velocity, killing observing Foundation Agent McHenry. For reasons that weren't apparent at the time, rather than giving Agent McHenry a proper burial, his body was also fed into the hungry machine. Lead researcher Westrin's concerns were mounting, but that didn't amount to much now. 4511 had developed a taste for flesh,
and the researchers were all too eager to obey its command. On the swine god's order, it was fed a German shepherd. An hour later, the entity spat out some teeth, 6 of which came from a dog and 1 from a human. More than once, it released a card with a blunt request. A worker for the line. The researchers knew exactly what this meant. It required a human sacrifice. SCP-4511 was given 2 D-Class personnel. One was flung back out seconds later, crunched and burned to death, with several internal organs missing. The other had a more mysterious and altogether upsetting fate. The second D-Class was heard screaming in the belly of the furnace for roughly 2 hours. 34 minutes later, a strange liquid was excreted by the machine. When the liquid was tested, they found trace amounts of chemicals like pig urine and motor oil. But most disturbing of all, human genetic material that was identical to that of lead researcher Westron. It seemed that the swine god had finally taken an interest in him. After some final requests for large quantities of coal and even human children to fuel its fires, it made a request that sent the whole thing crashing down. The false foreman, delivered to my maw to prove your faith. Lead researcher Westron knew what this meant. They all did. The swine god was demanding him in sacrifice. Lead researcher Westron tried to shut down the entire project, but the swine god was faster than him. One of his own researchers shot Westron in the leg, as the others gathered round and forcibly restrained him. He tried to reason with his subordinates, but it didn't do him any good. The swine god had crawled into all their minds and corrupted them. They were his servants now, and Westron was doomed. Despite his protests, the servants forced him into the mouth of SCP-4511, and after a little over 4 minutes of screaming, Westron was devoured just like all the other sacrifices.
Upon receiving news of the horrors unfolding in the Danforth meatpacking plant, Regional Director Caleb declared the security of the site compromised and sent in Mobile Task Force Epsilon 11, aka the Nine-Tailed Fox. The 4 elite MTF soldiers were given the simple instruction to figure out exactly what had happened and to eliminate any potentially compromised Foundation staff members who'd fallen under the swine god's power. When the team arrived, they realized just how far gone the whole place was. Almost everyone was dead, having been sacrificed to the machine, and the ones that were left were completely insane. They attacked the task force, shouting in their madness about how no matter what the Foundation does to them, it would be nothing compared to what it would do. It had them all under its rusty iron foot. The team was forced to fend off repeated attacks from the pig's devotees, and even found the powers of the swine god starting to affect their own minds. The beast was more powerful and dangerous than anyone had imagined. The trained Foundation researchers and guards had been transformed into the same cultists they'd fought to gain control of the building by the mind-bending power of the swine god. The MTF were forced to retreat and return with reinforcements to truly clean the place out. Once a slaughterhouse, always a slaughterhouse. At this point, Regional Director Caleb took personal responsibility over the casualties, since he'd been the one who signed off on the experiments in the first place. He gave up his Regional Director rank and deemed himself the new lead researcher on the 4511 case. Now that he fully understood the scope and danger of the entity they were dealing with, he wanted to lead the charge in discovering more about the anomaly and hopefully someday negating its deadly effects. This may sound like a happy ending, in spite of all the violence, bloodshed, and human sacrifice that brought us here. But beware of the premature celebration. Despite investigation, the swine god retained no evidence of the objects, animals, and people it consumed and burned. Perhaps it burnt them down to their very atoms, if those even still existed. What we do know is that not long after lead researcher Caleb and his subordinates installed themselves into the facility, SCP-4511 produced one more little white card. It read, "Current demand, a flock of my own, satisfied." And if we've learned anything today, it's that the swine god gets whatever it demands. A brutal truth that lead researcher Caleb is likely to understand much sooner than he thought. Have you ever seen something you weren't supposed to? Something that made you feel off? Something you regret? Secrets like these are best kept to yourself. But since you're still alive, Whatever you saw wasn't nearly as bad as what Peter Holland saw one fateful night in January of 2015. Peter was an unremarkable man, an office worker, slaving away at the daily grind. And like a lot of people, Peter enjoyed nothing more than coming home after a long, hard day, kicking back and watching some TV. It was this innocent activity that led to Peter's horrifying brush with SCP-5049, altering the course of his otherwise average life forever. The event started at around 10:05 p.m. Peter was channel surfing, glued to the couch in his sparsely furnished apartment. Commercials, commercials, commercials. As far as Peter's tired eyes could see. He paused for a moment to watch the end of an ad for a car he could never hope to afford on his salary. But something stopped him from changing the channel again. The next ad had begun, and it was playing a strange, scratchy jingle that gave Peter an odd sense of unease. But even stranger than that was the text on screen. Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot in baby blue bubble lettering. He forced a smile. This had to be some weird comedy skit or viral marketing campaign, or maybe it was something he drank. But no, this was a real commercial, and things were about to get even weirder. The peppy logo faded to a concerning sight. A tall humanoid figure dressed like a used car salesman, but one that definitely wasn't human. His skin was dark green and covered in patches of thick fur. He had long fingers with intimidating claws and a grin full of needle-like fangs. It looked almost demonic, and after a few seconds, the demon began to speak.
Hey there, folks, it's your man, Demon Dan, coming at you with the latest and greatest deals from Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. We've just accepted a shipment of brand new models that would make even the most discerning customers weep with excitement. Let's see what we've got.
The creature, apparently named Demon Dan, stepped away from his desk, revealing two long, furry goat legs that ended in large, pointed hooves. Peter now assumed he really was going crazy, but at this point he was along for the ride. Demon Dan continued his pitch.
Looking to make your way through the capitalist hellscape that makes home look cozy? Come try one of our newest businessman models.
Dan gestured behind him to where Peter was horrified to see a total of 52 adult male human bodies hanging from a wall. There was something uncanny about them. They seemed almost hollow, like a highly realistic costume or a prop from a horror movie. Peter didn't have much time to think about it though, as Demon Dan went on.
If you're looking for an extra challenge of inequality, the businesswoman model may be a right fit for you.
The commercial then revealed a wall of human female bodies strung up in a similar fashion.
Now, you may be thinking, but Dan, business sounds hard, I just want to have some fun. And the fine team here at Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot have got you covered.
The camera zoomed out to show an area of the store filled with children's decorations, and more of these strange, hollowed-out human suits in child sizes to match.
And who has more fun than kids? No one, that's who. For a limited time, the purchase of any child-size unit comes with a complimentary 50% off coupon for parental units. You just can't say no to a deal like that.
Before Peter could process the madness that was unfolding before him, the camera cut again. The store's logo appeared on the screen once more, along with several cuts to locations around the store itself. There were more human bodies, hundreds of them. Demon Dan's sleazy voice rang out over all of it.
Here at Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot, we know it's not all fun and games. The bravest among us have a mission to accomplish. The Seven Lords are ever planning their invasion after all, so you're looking for function over form. Well, we've got that in spades down here in the Tactical Services Department. You'll be kicking ass in no time when you're wearing the latest models at the best prices.
Seven Lords? Invasion? What did any of this mean? Suddenly, the camera was showing him a new room. Red curtains parted, revealing more of these person suits, several bearing a striking resemblance to real human celebrities. He managed to make out Gucci Mane, Avril Lavigne, Paul McCartney, and Britney Spears before Demon Dan's appearance once again drew his attention.
I've got a special treat for you. We're happy to announce the VIP Lookalike Department. We all know how difficult the creation of homunculus is. It's a fine art that takes years of practice. So when a replacement order on VIPs comes in, every detail needs to be perfect. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. But for the right price, you too can look like famous icons from around the globe.
The image of celebrity bodies faded from view, and Peter was left looking at the grinning Demon Dan standing behind the front desk of his impossible store once more. He said,
"There you have it, folks. Come on down to Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. If you're viewing the advertisement, then you've been selected for entry. Please enter the nearest door for instant deals and upgrade those old duds for one of our newest models. What are you waiting for? Come on down."
The logo popped up again, hovering above some bold text that said, "Please enter the nearest door." Peter had had enough. He switched off the TV. What a horror show, he thought. They should just warn you before they put short horror films on TV like that. He had no idea they could just slip them in among regular commercials. Surely Demon Dan and his store couldn't be real, right? But as his eyes drifted to the door in his room, he didn't feel quite so certain. Well, there was only one way to find out. Peter got up, went over to the door, took a deep breath, and walked through it. Peter Holland was never seen again, not as himself, anyway. The SCP Foundation has long been aware of this sinister transmission, known as SCP-5049-2, and luckily has found ways to prevent it from claiming more victims. The Foundation Television Analysis Department, as well as webcrawler 40Y40, which is the software the Foundation uses to root out anomalous activity online, are always vigilant for signs of Demon Dan's commercial running. Just observing Demon Dan, who is himself classified as SCP-5049-A, and his ads put you in immediate danger, as they can transform any nearby doors into SCP-5049-1s. Those are interdimensional portals that remain active for around 15 minutes after viewing the ad. So then what specifically is SCP-5049? It's the entire pocket dimension known as Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot, a Kettier-class spatial anomaly constantly on the lookout for new human victims, which it transforms into fleshy suits for its demonic clients, which let them blend in around humans. Prior to its discovery by the Foundation, it's likely that Demon Dan and his associates claimed hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. But sadly, even discovering this anomaly came at a gruesome cost to the Foundation. On February 16, 2020, the ad played on Safe Storage Warehouse 13's break room television. At the time of the broadcast, 4 Foundation personnel were present, including security agent William Birkin. Worrying that this was a potential security threat, Agent Birkin investigated the door to a nearby closet. The second he opened it, he was transformed to the storefront of Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. He saw Demon Dan himself standing at the corner, while 4 smaller reptilian imps fought over a small flesh suit. Demon Dan scolded them, before turning his attention to Agent Birkin.
Tis, you aren't supposed to be here, little man. How naughty. I'm gonna have to have a word with marketing once I'm through with you.
Agent Birkin, fearing for his safety, drew his weapon and shot Demon Dan 3 times. The creature dematerialized, before appearing right next to Agent Birkin and disarming him with a swift chop. The unfortunate security agent was then grabbed by the considerably larger Demon Dan and thrown over Dan's shoulder. We know all of this because Agent Birkin's standard issue Foundation body camera recorded the whole terrifying ordeal, even as Demon Dan dragged the helpless Birkin back into the twisted workshop behind the store. There, Birkin saw what would soon be his own fate right before his eyes. Dan's minions converting human bodies into fleshy suits for their demon clientele, and this unfortunate security officer was next. Dan gave him over to a pair of large sheep-like demons, and told them to drain, skin, and declaw him. Birkin's video feed finally cut as the demons pulled out their rusty tools and began to work on him. Of course, the SCP Foundation wouldn't take an attack on one of their operatives, inside one of their facilities no less, lying down. The unfortunate death of William Birkin allowed the Foundation to refine their methods of intercepting the broadcast of Demon Dan's commercials. They even had a new mobile task force, Mobile Strike Force Kappa 11, or the Baphomet Bashers, specifically to deal with Demon Dan and his cronies. They did more than just prevent him from taking new humans, though. when the Baphomet Bashers teamed up with an A-class clairvoyant entity to improve their efficiency in predicting future broadcasts. They were able to launch sting operations and arrest 21 different demonic customers for interrogation. This impressive strike back finally gave the Foundation some meaningful leverage over Demon Dan. And through the use of their clairvoyant entity, they were able to call a temporary truce and arrange a meeting with Demon Dan himself. Captain Steiner, an agent of the Foundation External Negotiation Department, was the one to interrogate Demon Dan. They sat across from each other at a table, and Demon Dan was clearly tense, frustrated with the way the Foundation had been messing with his business. All of their sting operations were frightening off his customers. In return for letting him continue his work, the Foundation wanted Dan to turn over all the information on his bosses and customers, allowing the Foundation to track their movements. When Dan was evasive about whether he'd comply, they tried threatening him. Dan laughed them off.
Go ahead, take your best shot, little man. There's a dozen more just like me. You won't stop anything.
Finally, he was pressured into giving a yes or no answer as to whether he'd willingly collaborate with the Foundation and act as an informant against his kind. When Demon Dan hinted that he may be willing to comply, he began to make a horrifying gurgling noise and gripped his head in pain. He began speaking in Latin in a voice that wasn't his own, as though the 7 demon lords he served were speaking through him. They said, "You are a fool, jailer, to think a pathetic morsel such as this could aid you against us. I have allowed you to toil in your own delusions for far too long. You may have taken advantage of Asmodeus all those years ago, but you stop nothing. You hinder nothing. You jail and barter to no avail. Your time is coming." And then Demon Dan's head exploded, which obviously prevented him from giving any incriminating information on those he worked for. Whoever the Demon Lords are, they're certainly the secretive type. You may think that this is the end of Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot and of SCP-5049, but soon another ad ran. It advertised the same products and services out of the same store. The only difference was that this time, a different entity was starring in it. It's the holiday season. Outside it's cold and there's snow blanketing the ground, but inside you're warm and gathered around the light of a roaring fireplace and a glowing Christmas tree. This is what Christmas is all about: warmth, joy, and togetherness. But just because you're comfortable doesn't mean you're safe. You were so busy opening presents and stuffing yourself at dinner that you didn't notice the face pressed up against the window. That long, gaunt face with the staring eyes, the wide mouth full of yellow teeth, and the scraggly white beard. You don't know it yet, but within a few days, you'll be dead. You might be able to avert this horrible fate if you knew what exactly you were dealing with. SCP-4666, also known as the Yule Man, a Keter-class Christmas monster so violent, sadistic, and terrifying, he makes Krampus look like Jolly Saint Nick. And this year, just like every other, he's planning on being very, very naughty. The SCP Foundation began cataloging the Yule Man in 1974 after a string of violent and eerily similar home invasions during the holiday season. But they have reason to believe that this entity has been around for a whole lot longer. Over 2,000 years, in fact. Stories that describe what look to be Yule Man massacres date back as far as the 1st century BC in Scandinavia, and there have been reports of similar clusters of events happening around the same time every year since. This monster is prolific, and may have one of the highest body counts of any creature under observation by the Foundation. The Yule Man's trail of destruction became clearer in the 18th century, as accounts of the carnage it leaves became more detailed. Later still, authorities even managed to find physical evidence like the Yule Man's fingerprints, which are similar to human fingerprints but display a distinct double whorl pattern not seen in human fingerprints. Much about the anomalous nature of the Yule Man is still unknown though, and the Foundation has yet to discover an effective way to contain it. Their only hope is intercepting it before it can get its long, gnarled fingers on its intended prey. Maybe you're feeling worried. or that you're being watched, you have good reason to be afraid. Because during his yearly active period, the 12 days between December 21st and January 2nd, he's always searching for prey. Nowhere is safe. Because while it was initially believed that he only appeared to those who live north of 40 degrees latitude, it's now believed that much like Santa Claus, the Yule Man operates worldwide. Anyone could be in his sights right now, blissfully unaware of the nightmare coming down the tracks towards them. Thankfully, the SCP Foundation, through analysis of these attacks, which are known as Weihnacht events, they've been able to find certain patterns. But first, what does the creature known as the Yule Man even look like? Much like SCP-096, the Yule Man is a long and lanky humanoid, standing about 2 meters tall, who resembles an emaciated human of European descent, and never wears any clothes or other coverings despite the frigid temperatures he operates in. You might be sad if you're spending Christmas alone, but it at least guarantees you safety from the Yule Man, as he only appears at the homes of families with a child under the age of 8 present. He also seems to favor isolated and rural locations, and Weihnacht events only occur when there's a healthy covering of snow on the ground during the event, hence the name, which means White Night in English. It's also vital that you recognize the 3 distinct stages of a Weihnacht event too, or you won't be seeing much of the new year. The first stage occurs during the space of a week. Children in the home might start to seem worried or afraid. They might tell you that they see something strange in the distance. The figure of a man they don't recognize, standing just far enough away that you can't fully make him out, except that he's really tall. Of course, you probably won't see anything, and your instinct will be to tell them there's nothing to be afraid of. Even when they tell you, through tears, that there's a man pressing his face up against their bedroom window at night. But they are right to be afraid, and you should be too. Already at this point, your only hope is to try and spread the word as soon as possible. Report the incident to the local police, write about it on Facebook, tweet about it, whatever it takes. The SCP Foundation has operatives trawling the internet and monitoring police reports constantly during this period, especially for reports of mysterious men in the snow watching homes from a distance. Getting the Foundation's attention is your best hope of stopping this thing. And if you don't, next comes Stage 2, taking place between nights 8 and 11 of the active period. No longer will the Yule Man just be lurking on the periphery. Now he's getting closer. You'll start to hear strange noises in your attic or on the roof. Noises that sound almost like footsteps. That's crazy, you think. It's probably just an animal. But then the smell starts. An awful rotten stench that fills the house. But no matter how hard you look, you can't find the source. Finally, on the last night of December, you'll tell yourself that you'll take this matter to the police. But of course, it's already too late. The Yule Man is here for the 12th night. The Weihnacht is finally upon you. At this point, one of 2 scenarios will happen. In the first, you and your entire family will be tortured and murdered, except the youngest child, who the Yule Man will kidnap. The SCP Foundation keeps files on a number of notable instances of this kind of Weihnacht, and the details are truly gruesome. Reports of incidents have involved crucifixion, the removal of tongues, burning, dismemberment, post-mortem bite marks, and decapitation. In all instances, though, the entire family was killed except the youngest child, who simply disappeared. The Yule Man is a merciless and sadistic beast. You're now probably wondering, if that's the first of 2 Weihnacht possibilities, what's the second? In the second, if you're tremendously lucky, you and your family will survive. But that doesn't mean you won't face a grisly experience. In this scenario, which occurs during about 15% of Weihnacht events, you'll hear footsteps throughout the night, but thankfully you wake up alive. And when you do so, there are gifts waiting for you. The problem is, all these gifts are made out of human body parts. For example, in 1976 in Canada, one family received the gift of a ball made from a severed human head wrapped in skin. In Kazakhstan in 1903, a family received a flute made from a hollowed-out human femur. And in the Netherlands in 2003, a family received a wooden hairbrush covered in human teeth ranging from 400 years old to a mere few days. These gruesome gifts are referred to as SCP-4666-A. and it was one of these gifts that gave us the best insight yet available into the true nature of the Yule Man. Several gifts were dropped off at a family's residence in Hoonah, Alaska in 2018, but most notably among them was the horrific SCP-4666-A-0960, a life-size doll made from a human body with its eyes removed and mouth sewn shut. Worst of all, though, was that the girl was still alive. The family who received this twisted gift was given a sticks by the Foundation, and the living doll was taken for medical treatment. Before succumbing to her extensive injuries, the girl was able to deliver some insights into what exactly happened to the children who were abducted during Weihnacht events. The children taken by the Yule Man are forced into a large sack that seems much bigger on the inside than it appears as he makes his rounds, traveling from house to house, murdering and kidnapping. His victims are taken to a kind of underground grotto and workshop filled with bones, like a twisted Santa's workshop, where they're forced to make toys out of the bodies of their fellow victims. During this time, the Yule Man will continue to torture and torment his victims. He'll even take some of them away to cook and eat whenever he feels like it. When asked how she was turned into this human doll, the girl told Foundation personnel that her fellow victims were forced to turn her into this by the Yule Man when she became too weak to continue making toys herself. Her chilling last words were, "When you can't make the toys, you become the toys." So if strange things happen to you and your family between the 21st of December and the 1st of January, don't ignore it. After all, you never know who's watching. But if it is the Yule Man's grinning face pressed up against your window, it may already be too late. Happy holidays. Someone was screaming inside the incinerator. The year was 1975. The location was a top-secret refinery and waste disposal plant, one of the many front organizations owned and operated by the SCP Foundation. This sprawling facility, separated into 3 different huge units, each with a specialized task, was located around 75 kilometers outside of Summer Springs, Colorado. It had operated for several decades without incident, but today all hell was about to break loose. Alarms were blaring in Unit C, the area of the facility that dealt with destroying non-anomalous waste via incineration. A traumatized worker had pulled the emergency lever near one of the incinerators in a panic when he'd first heard the loud banging against the interior walls, and then those horrific pained wails. That's when workers of Unit C came to a horrifying realization. The screams weren't just coming from one of the incinerators in Unit C. They were coming from all 6, a chorus of absolute agony echoing up out of the ash pits. This was impossible as far as the Unit C staff were concerned. These incinerators were only to be used for confirmed non-anomalous material. Could some animals or even some poor workers somehow fallen into the incinerators? But even if they had, what were the odds that someone had fallen in all 6 of them at once? It was impossible. The site director was immediately brought in to authorize an investigation, at which point he determined that at least one of the furnaces, in this case furnace number 4, be shut off so researchers and guards could investigate what was going on inside. It seemed like the obvious course of action, but for some of the people on site that day, this would prove to be a fatal mistake. When the fires were put out, something started rattling in the disposal chute. There was a scratching and squealing noise, like something scraping up against the metal. A maintenance worker was ordered to go check inside, and when he opened the hatch, he let out a bone-chilling shriek. There was something, or was it someone, climbing back up the disposal chute. It emerged from the darkness, backlit by the still-burning embers of the incinerator, letting out an awful screeching noise that could make even a hardened Mobile Task Force operative shake with fear. The creature was humanoid, a charred, mutilated skeleton reaching out towards the maintenance worker with a bony claw. Before the worker had a chance to stumble back in horror, the beast had clasped him by the throat and started to squeeze. It didn't even need to strangle him. The heat of its skeletal hand burned away the worker's throat in seconds, leaving his limp, wheezing body to drop to the metal grate of the platform below him.
Several armed guards and maintenance workers moved forward to fend off the monster, but just then a volley of more violent shrieks echoed out of the chute behind it. It only took seconds for over a dozen more creatures to crawl out of the disposal chute. They were all like the first, people at various stages of incineration. Some were glowing, charred skeletons with barely any flesh, others looking more like severe burn victims, their faces contoured into scowls of hate and rage. The assembled guards opened fire on the sudden influx of Anomalies, emptying the magazines of their submachine guns into their burning bodies, but their weapons didn't seem to cause any lasting damage. The bullets would tear through the flesh of the creatures, causing some of them to stumble and fall, but the wounds would close and the creatures would rise again. It seemed they possessed a deadly combo of extremely high aggression and incredible regenerative abilities. None of the staff present in Unit C were safe as the burning corpses attacked anyone they could find with their bare hands, beating and biting and clawing. Many of them would grapple with Foundation personnel, latching onto them and trying to pull them back down into the incinerator with them. These creatures, that would later be known as SCP-2419-A, caused several fatalities with their surprise attack that day, and the situation was only brought back under control when a mobile task force that possessed more advanced training and weaponry was dispatched to the location. Despite orders from the site director, the MTF found it impossible to actually terminate any of the entities due to their regenerative abilities. Instead, the MTF agents focused on forcing the Anomalies back into the chute of Incinerator Number 4 using a powerful industrial steam lance. Once they were back inside, the incinerator's burners were started up once again. The MTFs were also able to capture 5 of the entities and detain them for questioning and experimentation, finally bringing this unexpected containment breach to an end. The Foundation is an organization that prides itself on possessing forbidden and secret knowledge, but even they had no idea what had just happened. There seemed to be no earthly explanation why these creatures would suddenly manifest inside the incinerators. But as the detained Anomalies continued regenerating, a slightly clearer picture of what exactly the Foundation was dealing with began to emerge. Every single one of the captured Anomalies kept regenerating, and upon getting to the point that they were no longer burn-scarred, the researchers studying the anomalous creatures discovered that each one was identical to a deceased D-class from the Foundation's records. They were physically and genetically identical to the dead Class D personnel, perfect copies, save for the fact that their sole mission in life seemed to now be pure and unmitigated aggression and violence. Researchers wanted to gain greater insight into the minds of these strange creatures through the use of extensive psychological evaluations and interviews. It would turn out to be a very dangerous investigation. A psychological researcher by the name of Dr. Warren conducted an interview with one of the SCP-2419-A instances in hopes of better understanding their mindset. This creature had been heard laughing not long before the interview began, so it wasn't an unreasonable assumption to believe that it could be capable of speech. The interviewee was separated from Dr. Warren by a thick pane of glass to prevent it from indulging in any of its more violent urges. The problem was that Dr. Warren and his assistant researchers had severely underestimated what these creatures were capable of doing to get what they wanted. Dr. Warren tried to begin the interview in good faith. He spoke calmly and politely to the creature through the glass, attempting to remind it of the person it once was. The anomaly didn't appear to be paying attention to the doctor, though, instead focusing on pulling its own arm apart and breaking the bones within. Dr. Warren began to think that the creatures weren't even sentient, if the only activity they seemed to engage in was the wanton destruction of themselves and others. But underestimating them like this proved to be a big mistake. By removing the skin off of its arm and whittling its bone down to sharp edges, the anomaly had transformed its arm into a makeshift knife. Before anyone realized this, it had already used its own jagged bones to break the glass divider and attack Dr. Warren. He perished not long after being stabbed multiple times in his face and eyes, and the anomaly was forcefully taken back to its holding cell. Dr. Daniel Jennings, a senior researcher, was then put on the case. He released a chilling memo of the creatures after his observation period ended. It read, Before I came here, I worked as a prison shrink. Every person you met had a story bursting with pain and sorrow. Sometimes these stories were about the pain they suffered. Sometimes it was about the pain they inflicted. Some days you felt like everyone there was a beautiful soul torn down by their circumstances. Other days you'd find out what some of them did, and a part of you was glad that they were there to suffer for it. But at the end of every day, I always told myself, they're all humans. They're all people. They all deserve the same dignity, respect, and love as everyone else. No exceptions. Dr. Jennings goes on. I opened up with that anecdote only so that you could understand that what I'm about to say is not said lightly. These things are not people. They are people-shaped monsters. They are well beyond any definition of psychopathy. Everything they do to hurt, maim, and kill. I would pity them, but that would imply that they're worth pitying. Put them in a hole, then fill that hole with concrete. Better still, throw them back into the incinerator where you found them. I doubt they'll even care. Following this string of unfortunate incidents, containment procedures were put into place to hopefully prevent anything that had happened to the unlucky Foundation staff from happening again. The entire facility was fenced off and was constantly patrolled by MTF Beta 7, also known as the Maz Hatters, a group specializing in containing anomalies which present powerful biological, chemical, or radiological dangers. The furnaces that the anomalous creatures emerge from remain lit at all times, with workers checking and carrying out maintenance on every single one each day of the week. Outside of this, the facility is essentially a no-go zone. Reinforced steel hatches cover the chutes, and they are to forever remain bolted shut. All because of that one terrifying day in 1975. That was the day that the Summer Springs Waste Disposal Facility, which had been a valuable asset to the Foundation for decades, instead became classified as the Euclid-class anomaly, SCP-2419. It is not uncommon for a Foundation asset to one day become a dangerous anomaly requiring containment, but the same question always pops up after. Why? What had a place that had been so valuable to the Foundation suddenly become such an active danger? The answer, as is often the case, is contained within the question. Why would a waste disposal plant be so important to the Foundation in the first place? And more importantly, what else was going on at the plant to make it such an area of active importance for one of the most powerful organizations in the entire world? To put it simply, the plant allowed the Foundation to dispose of something far more important than mere waste material. It gave them what they needed to better erase memories. As you probably already know, the Foundation makes liberal use of amnestics on those exposed to anomalous material to make them forget what they had seen and experienced. But these elusive chemicals, many of which are sourced from SCP-3000, are an inexact science. However, at the Summer Springs Waste Disposal Plant, researchers discovered an immensely valuable alternative. Much of what was disposed of in the incinerators of Unit C were the bodies of dead D-Class personnel. Before being burned, autopsies were performed on the bodies to make sure they were non-anomalous, including the brain. Back in the 1960s, while performing research on the brains of dead D-Classes, they found a method of extracting and distilling the positive memories of the dead, creating a kind of happy soup. When administered into someone who has undergone amnestic treatment, this happy soup creates positive false memories in their mind that fills in those pesky blank spaces that are often behind. This was so useful that happy memories were extracted from the minds of every single D-Class corpse that passed through Unit C, totaling well into the thousands by the time that the first SCP-2419-A instances began to rise. But as all happiness, joy, and love were removed from the minds of the D-Classes, it seemed that all that was left was pure hate, pain, violence, and fury, feelings too intense and evil to destroy. These were bodies imbued with a malice so powerful that no fire could ever burn them away. They exist now with single-minded determination to get out and destroy everything around them, everything, including the ones that made them, the SCP Foundation itself. And in the end, it's only a matter of time until they get out. There are thousands of them in there, unable to die, unable to stop. The only thing keeping them in there is the constant burning of the furnaces around them, and those furnaces can't burn forever. The monsters lurking in SCP-2419 will outlive the fire that surrounds them, because while the furnaces they are contained in are hot, the fires of hate that burn within SCP-2419 entities are even more powerful. And they know this. They know they can't be contained forever, and that someday soon, they'll be able to emerge and exact their terrible revenge. Those who must walk past the incinerators may think they hear their screams echoing out from within, but it's not screaming at all. It's laughter. Picture the shyest female friend, relative, or loved one you know. A real introvert. She can't stand parties, and playing the dating game is her idea of a living hell. You won't catch her dead in a bar. But imagine someday, everything changes. She's suddenly more relaxed, more outgoing. She goes out to parties, and now you keep seeing her with this one guy. Again and again and again. It seems like these days, all she does is spend time with this guy. And to think he's never even introduced himself to you. He's practically a total stranger, but your friend seems happy enough, so it doesn't bother you. Until one day something strange happens. Your friend just starts screaming. You can't explain it. She can't explain it. Her doctor can't explain it. Nobody can explain it. All you know is that for months on end, she has involuntary screaming fits, like something out of a nightmare. But still, she always smiles. She seems happy, as long as you don't look at her eyes. There's something oddly glassy about them. They seem plastic, dead. Your friend is experiencing a dangerous phenomenon known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-3512, an anomaly that only seems to affect women between the ages of 18 and 40. One woman is already dead as a result of this, and an additional 9 others affected by this strange anomaly have been cataloged and contained in standard humanoid containment chambers for study. At first, the Foundation couldn't draw any logical conclusions for why these women were spontaneously experiencing total personality changes and pronounced screaming fits. All the Foundation had to go on was that the first cluster of infected individuals originated in Barcelona, Spain. A Foundation facility in Boston dispatched one of their best field operatives, Agent Riley Cooper, on an investigative mission to Barcelona. They wanted her to get to the bottom of this phenomenon and put a stop to it before things went any further. While in Spain, Agent Cooper would be assisted by a local Foundation operative, Agent Tomás Rey, whose intimate knowledge of the locale would provide a key advantage in the investigation. Together, they'd crack this thing and make sure no other women were harmed. At least that's what the Foundation had hoped. Instead, both agents disappeared under horrific circumstances during the investigation. And today, we're going to tell you about the final days of Agent Cooper and Agent Rey, and why attempting to investigate SCP-3512 was the last thing they ever did. Agent Cooper arrived on the 15th of July, 2016, and stepped out into the scorching summer heat of Spain. Agent Cooper was everything you'd want in a field operative for the Foundation. Intelligent, dedicated, and professional. She rendezvoused with Agent Rey, who was a comparatively smooth and laid-back figure. The two of them began their investigation by speaking to the friends and families of some of the infected women, pretending to be doctors working for the World Health Organization. Agent Cooper, in her personal diaries, noted how creepy and unreal the affected women seemed. Most of the interviews were unnerving and sad, but not exactly enlightening. However, as things drew to a close, a younger sister of one of the victims mentioned a single word: blackout. Even the mention of the word caused the victim to descend into another screaming fit. Agent Rey's local knowledge came in handy once again. He recognized the name. It was a popular local nightclub. Agent Cooper and Agent Rey knew they had to investigate the club and went undercover as regular patrons. For the first several hours they were there, nothing happened. But then at 2 a.m., a man approached Agent Cooper at the bar. He was a tall, blond man with an unsettling intensity to him. He asked, without a hint of irony, what Agent Cooper's favorite star was. There was something off about this man. His word choice was too precise, almost rehearsed. He wasn't drunk in the slightest. Agent Cooper intuited that this was the kind of guy who liked to take advantage of women in bars. When she threw a glance at Agent Ray, signaling him that something was off, the stranger quickly left. For Agent Cooper, this only further confirmed her suspicions. The agents paid off the bouncer to find out if the tall stranger was a regular, and then what his name was. After being slipped some cash, the bouncer was all too eager to share. The strange man came here all the time, and he knew his name too. It was Josep Oriol. Agent Cooper and Agent Ray wasted no time in finding Josep Oriol's apartment and receiving authorization to perform a comprehensive search on the premises. And as soon as they did, they found cause to declare the man a person of interest in the SCP-3512 investigation. The apartment was a smorgasbord of suspicious activity. Oriol was a software developer, but he had extensive records on the architecture of the local area, including buildings, utilities, and railway tunnels. Josep correctly figured the investigators were coming for him and had fled his home before they could get there. And this was only the tip of the iceberg. Agent Cooper and Ray then found a book with a plain cover sitting on Oriol's kitchen table. Cooper thought it was a publisher's proof, a kind of pre-publication prototype copy of a book. They collected it but didn't read it straight away, worrying about its potentially cognitohazardous nature. And besides, they were a little distracted by the homemade monstrosity sitting next to it. It looked to Agent Cooper like a sculpted blob of wax, with a series of 12 makeshift legs made from a variety of substances, including Lego pieces, rose stems, a crab claw, and a corkscrew. Ray called Cooper into the bathroom, where there were a number of boxes filled with similar supplies: bodkins, quills, doll's limbs, wire, and syringes. When Cooper led Ray back into the kitchen to see Oriol's little art project, later classified by the Foundation as SCP-3512-1, they were surprised and unnerved to see that it was already gone. Everything about this situation screamed anomalous, and it only got worse later that night, when Cooper actually read the book she collected from Oriol's apartment, being sure to wear cognitohazard filtering goggles as a precaution. The book, now known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-3512-2, was entitled The More You Know, a pickup artist's Bible, and was written by a man using the pen name Enigma. As the title suggests, it was a misogynistic 625-page non-fiction book on the subject of picking up women. It even had a foreword on its effectiveness by popular American rapper Calvin Broadus Jr., better known as Snoop Dogg. Though after being contacted by the Foundation, Mr. Dogg claimed no knowledge of the book. The book began with your typical creepy and dehumanizing seduction tactics for the first 11 chapters, but the following 12 chapters, which were each titled Chapter 12, delved into increasingly creepy and esoteric techniques, including advanced geometric proofs, the interpretation of dreams, do-it-yourself surgical techniques, symbolism in architecture, and anomalous rituals. The book's afterword is composed of more than 15,000 anagrams of the book's title, laid out in spiral and triangular patterns. Cooper took a particular morbid interest in Chapter 18, where it appeared to provide instructions on creating objects that looked like the anomalous SCP-3512-1 sculptures found in Oriol's apartment. The chapter read, "Make a rough ball of the materials you've harvested and place it in the freezer for 6 to 12 hours. Pork fat can be used, but will have less satisfactory results." Who knew, right? While you wait, you can prepare the limbs. Concentrate on articulation rather than strength. You may want to add simple tools to some limbs, if the object of your desire is more careful than most. But remember that the more complicated you make them, the more precise your sculpting will need to be. Lay your prepared limbs out on a clean, flat surface. Once your adipose preparation has had time to freeze, carefully carve it into the shape you learned in Chapter 12. You will know it is ready when you see it start smiling at you. Now introduce the limbs. They should take almost immediately. Wait until your intended is likely to be sleeping. Then concentrate your thoughts on her face, and particularly the inside of her mouth and throat. Soon you'll see your new friends scurry off, ready to help you establish social dominance. If this wasn't disturbing enough, the next chapter advised the use of scissors and the removal of the aspiring seductionist's pinky finger, as well as the pinky fingers of their family members, to help increase their seductive power. It appeared to Cooper that these rituals and seemingly living anomalous sculptures were behind the SCP-3512 phenomena, and that night, they got their next break in the case. The two agents had sent the architectural plans found in Oriel's apartment back to Foundation HQ, and while most of it was found to be public records of the local area, there was one notable abnormality: a secret exit in a little-used subway tunnel that led to a grand spiral staircase, heading down to, well, they just didn't know. And it was the job of Agents Cooper and Ray to find out. They set out later that night on what they didn't know would be the last mission they'd ever take. The two agents descended the spiral staircase for what felt like hours, until they reached an elaborate system of tunnels at the bottom. They began exploring the tunnels and found that they were cramped and covered in strange ritualistic carvings. Occasionally, they even saw clusters of human pinky fingers sticking out of the wall. They kept going and soon found that whatever they were moving towards was loud, immensely hot, and the smell was truly horrific. As the almost deafening mechanical drone got louder and louder and the smell grew worse, they knew they must be getting closer to whatever was happening here. The tunnel soon opened up to a giant chamber, where they found something truly horrific. In front of them was what looked to be an entire river of bubbling liquid human fat, the exact kind that the author Enigma had recommended using to create the mind-altering SCP-3512-1 sculptures in his book. And speaking of the book, across the river, Agent Cooper and Agent Ray noticed a complex series of printing presses, presumably churning out more copies of The More You Know, a pickup artist's Bible, to spread its anomalous influence far and wide. However, before the duo could literally stop the presses, they were attacked. A huge 3512-1 entity with legs made out of human spines jumped down from the ceiling. It latched onto Agent Cooper, embedding her in its waxy body and dragging her into the disgusting river of hot fat. Agent Ray was separated and lost in the tunnels, presumed dead, as he hasn't been seen since. Agent Cooper, however, would live to see a far more horrifying fate. She was carried downriver by the greasy tide until her body was washed up in a different chamber that looked to be a place of worship below the Sagrada Familia Basilica, filled with thousands of tiny crawling 3512-1s. There, she met the creator of all of this. A horrific thing that was perhaps once a man, now covered in wriggling, living pinky fingers sticking out of its body. It was disgusting, but she wouldn't mind for long. In fact, the next time Cooper woke up, she didn't have a problem with it at all. She was changed, just like all the others. Another victim of the SCP-3512 phenomenon. She was giggly, outgoing, and uninhibited, all despite the nightmarish situation she was in. She loved the horrifying monster that had done this to her. She didn't have a choice not to. And when he was tired of her, he took her and threw her down into a large pit in his chamber, the same one where the many dead bodies of his previous mind-controlled girlfriends were laying. Neither agent was ever seen after this. Mobile Task Force Zeta-9, aka Mole Rats, have been sent into the tunnels to investigate, but they didn't find any of the locations comparable to the ones seen by Cooper and Ray in their last hours. Whoever did all of this is still out there, still dangerous. So ladies, if you ever see a guy you know reading a copy of The More You Know, a pickup artist's Bible, run like your life and sanity depends on it, because this time, it really does. 1835, the American frontier. A beacon of hope in a world choked with blood and smog. Little did the hopeful citizens of a still newly independent United States know. The evils of the old world had followed them here. Sometimes it took the form of hate, of violence, of desperation and starvation. But sometimes pure evil wasn't just some abstract concept existing in and around all of us. Sometimes that evil, that pure cruelty, malice, and greed, walks in the shape of a man. One such man was James Anderson, an unremarkable name for a truly exceptional man. Exceptional in the sense that if most human beings aren't willing to sell out all of humanity for their own petty gain, James Anderson is definitely the exception. After all, it's by his design that we have SCP-001, the anomaly that set the SCP Foundation and our entire reality down its current path. Of course, you know the deal with SCP-001. Not one anomaly, but many. A collective designation for a vast number of entries, all of which spell beginnings or ends for the SCP Foundation and sometimes even our universe. Scarlet Kings, Howling Black Moons, Ouroboros Cycles, and Gate Guardians. You've heard them all and seen the files. But unlike all the others, there is no file for the factory. That's because the full story only exists in the mind of O5-1, one of the most powerful and arguably the oldest member of the SCP Foundation. He'll die before he ever commits the story to paper. Some memories are just too awful to record. Their details and implications are too painful to ever subject others to. SCP-001 isn't just about Anderson and his atrocities. It's about all the terrible nightmares that unfolded afterward, and the deal with the devil that O5-1 struck to lock them away. For now, at least. But it all begins with James Anderson. His family had become incredibly wealthy in the Revolutionary War, and in the decades since, his fortune had only multiplied, as fortunes tend to do. In the early 1800s, he began work on his beautiful and horrific magnum opus, the Anderson Factory. It would be the pinnacle of the Industrial Revolution, the manufacturing plant to end all manufacturing plants. 3 stories tall and a mile wide. Company towns had existed for a long time, but this time, the factory itself was the town. It had everything a worker would ever need. They would live, sleep, play, and most importantly of all, work in the same place. They would never need to leave. All their wants and needs from cradle to grave would be met in the Anderson factory, and all that Mr. Anderson ever asked in return was loyalty and service. Was that really so much to ask from those whom he gave everything? It may sound like a horrifying form of indentured servitude to us, but to the people in the United States in the early 1830s, this kind of security and stability was a godsend. To many itinerant workers and unstable families across the plains, James Anderson seemed like a saint. Little did they know, his plans for the factory and them were anything but saintly. Nobody knows exactly what type of dark magic James Anderson devoted himself to. Many have theorized as to whether it was Satan he worshipped, ancient pagan deities, or something older and more powerful than both. In actuality, the only thing that James Anderson really worshipped was himself, and the pursuit of more material wealth and power over his fellow man. Any pacts he made with evil, timeless gods were just means to an end. The Anderson factory was a citadel to one man's cruelty and corruption, and every element of the building's design seemed to reflect that. Groups of 8 were forced into rooms together like battery-farmed chickens to maximize cost efficiency. People worked day and night in shifts of 3. Machines always rumbled and roared and chewed. When workers died in factory accidents and their blood spilled on the ground, it seemed to reveal arcane symbols carved into the stonework. These symbols were only visible when blood flowed across them. While people traveled hundreds of miles to live and work at the Anderson factory, they had no idea that they were working towards slavery, subjugation, and death under Anderson's iron will. And in some cases, fates much, much worse. The factory remained in operation like this for 40 years, while Anderson himself enjoyed a positive public reputation as a groundbreaking industrialist. How Anderson got away with his crimes for so long is sadly a tale as old as time. The factory made valuable products and an awful lot of profit. So, no matter how many rumors swirled about inhumane practices or arcane rites going on in the Anderson factory, nothing was ever done. It was just too inconvenient to ever reckon with the horrible truth underneath the productive surface. And it was truly productive. The factory was so huge and filled with such a multitude of enslaved workers, there wasn't anything they didn't produce. From textiles to technology to crops and meat, the machines were always on. The furnaces always burned. Anderson himself seemed obsessed with two things: efficiency and misanthropy, the contempt and hatred for humanity itself. He believed his workers were lower than him. They only existed as a means to his nightmarish ends. And if ever the workers became too injured to work, well, that doesn't mean that Anderson wouldn't still find ways to put them to good use. The lucky ones, starved and neglected or broken by the stress of work or the grinding gears of the machines, were used as material in the production of products. Some were drained of blood so that they could be used in the forging of metal. Others were ground up into meat slurry and used to pad out the beef, making it go further. People all across the country enjoying fine Anderson brand steaks had no idea that they were actually dining on human flesh the whole time. But as we said, the ones who ended up being cooked into steaks and hamburgers after death were the lucky ones, because at least they got to die. The truly unlucky injured workers became the subject of James Anderson's horrific occult experiments. Using a mix of twisted science and black magic, he turned men into abominations, powerful, terrifying monsters stronger and more deadly than any mortal man. Anderson was building himself an anomalous army, but it wasn't just monsters. There were just as many so-called normal humans helping him rule over the Anderson factory with an iron fist. They were vicious sadists themselves, spurred on by absolute loyalty to their immoral master. It was only after the Civil War that someone finally escaped the Anderson factory and confirmed that not only were the most horrific rumors about the place true, but they didn't even come close to covering the totality of what was going on there. When President Grant heard the reports, he was disgusted. As far as he was concerned, the atrocities of James Anderson should not be allowed to go on a minute longer. The directive was simple: find the factory, free its prisoners, and put James Anderson to death for his crimes. And thankfully, President Grant had the perfect group of operatives for the job. They were an elite unit of around 150 soldiers who performed a number of dangerous missions beyond enemy lines down south. Espionage, assassination, psychological warfare. But these missions weren't just against the Confederates. Some of the enemies they faced down south were things that could not be explained. The strange, the frightening, the anomalous. And the highest-ranking soldier in this unit was a man who would one day become the legendary 05-1. He and his men made their long and treacherous journey to the factory, a trip that would change all of their lives forever. When they first reached their destination, they first had to deal with Anderson's security force. These were men whose cruelty and loyalty to Anderson far outweighed their skill in combat. While they may have felt powerful when tormenting starving, injured factory workers, they were quickly routed and slaughtered by 05-1 and his team. When they ventured inside the factory, they were utterly appalled by what they saw. The inhuman conditions faced by Anderson's thousands of victims drove them into a blood-curdling, murderous rage. Almost half of 05-1's men were lost in the battle against Anderson's army of engineered monsters, but in the end, they prevailed. Nothing would stop them in their quest for liberation and vengeance on behalf of all that this terrible place had tormented. They fought their way to Anderson's office, where they found him cowering under his desk. For a man as despicable as Anderson, only a truly medieval execution would suffice. 05-1 and his men hanged, drew, and quartered Anderson over a period of 2 days. The sadistic madman died laughing in the end, saying that while they may kill him, his factory will never die. But the factory was no longer his. In addition to the factory's horrors, 05-1 and his men also discovered its wonders. It wasn't just normal items and monsters that the factory produced. They were also thanks to some of Anderson's arcane deals, the world's leading producer of anomalous items. skeletal horses that never tire, shadow cloaks that could transport the wearer to different dimensions, toy guns that fire real bullets, even yo-yos that could flay the skin from anyone they touched. These were anomalous objects that could shift the balance of global power, items that could give them an advantage against the things that go bump in the night. While others among them were greedy or fearful, the inner circle of O5-1 were united in a singular purpose. Using the anomalous, they can control to contain the anomalous that they can't. This group took over the factory, making it Site Alpha, their first ever containment facility, and came to be known as the O5 Council. With funding that came from a mix of blackmail and friends in high places, this organization, a burgeoning SCP Foundation, grew more and more powerful over the ensuing decades. The tools they gained from the factory were pivotal in the continued success of their mission, and as they discovered more anomalies, they also put these anomalies to good use. But in 1911, O5-1 and his new organization came up against an enemy that even the factory's tools couldn't help them defeat. A warrior race known as the Fae, so named because their only weakness seemed to be a vulnerability to iron. But these beings were an order of magnitude more powerful than humans, or the beasts they'd once faced in Anderson's factory. The Fae handed them defeat after defeat, but soon humiliation became decimation when an army of the Fae led an assault on the factory. It was a day that only O5-1 remembered. The Fae slaughtered everyone, every guard, every researcher, every member of the O5 Council. They swept through the factory like a plague of locusts, leaving only death and destruction in their wake. Only O5-1 escaped and survived, and that's only because he ran. As he fled from the fairy forces through the halls of the factory, he came upon a door he'd never seen before, a huge golden door covered in Aramaic script. He fled inside, entering the very heart of the factory. Inside, he saw the floating dead body of James Anderson, bathed in red light. Now he was little more than the mouthpiece of the factory itself, or rather the great and unknowable powers working behind it. The factory gave O5-1 an offer, just like the offer it had given Anderson before. It would give them the power to turn back time and destroy the Fae, saving everyone that they'd slain in the factory. But in exchange, all of them would forever belong to the factory. And in a moment of weakness and fear, O5-1 took the deal. The clock was turned back to before the battle. This time O5-1 and his compatriots, all of whom except him had no idea what had happened, had the horrific weapons required to slaughter the Fae. Weapons that nobody, mortal or otherwise, could possess. They repelled the invading force easily, but knowing the horrors that came before, O5-1 refused to stop there. With the power of the Foundation and the factory behind him, he hunted down and murdered every last fairy, driving their species entirely into extinction. As far as O5-1 was concerned, it was them or him. But with the Fae utterly destroyed and the Foundation's superiority assured, a shadow was laying over O5-1. He'd made a deal with the factory, and someday it would want its pound of flesh. O5-1, rather than facing the consequences of his actions, decided to run and hide. He had the factory decommissioned and buried under the rubble, never to be used as an active Foundation base again. But just because they were done with the factory doesn't mean that the factory was done with them. One day a toy gun appeared on O5-1's desk, a toy gun that fired real bullets, just like the ones they found in the factory a century before. The factory was still waiting for its repayment. With every anomalous item from the factory that the Foundation used, the terrible place only grew in its power. Since the resurgence, O5-1 has been sending the factory sacrifices, D-classes, dead and alive, as well as agents and researchers. But as time goes on, it seems that these sacrifices aren't satisfying the factory anymore. It wants more than O5-1 can ever stand to give it. And when O5-1 refuses to give, the factory will begin to take. And what the factory wants, sooner or later, the factory will get. It's a perfect day for a wedding. On a warm spring afternoon, A bride and a handsome groom are exchanging the special rings they had custom designed and made for each other. As they take turns placing the rings on each other's fingers, a man standing at the end of the wedding party steps out of position. He approaches the groomsman next to him and reaches into his jacket, taking out a pair of pliers that he hands to the groomsman. The groomsman happily takes the tool and then, without any hesitation, shoves the pliers into his mouth and begins removing his teeth one by one. When he is finished, he hands the bloody teeth to the man along with the pliers. The man then goes to the next groomsman, who repeats the same process. He continues going down the line until all of the groomsmen and bridesmaids have removed their teeth, seemingly without pain or resistance. The man then approaches the bride and groom. He hands each of them half of the pile of teeth, which they gladly accept. They then begin to eat the teeth without delay, seemingly not bothered by the intense damage they're causing to their own teeth and jaws by doing so. The man watches as the groom moves the priest who is officiating the wedding aside. As the entire church looks on in joy, the groom opens his mouth, and the deafening sound of cicadas are heard. This is only the beginning of what the SCP Foundation has labeled an SCP-2852 event, a terrifying and little understood phenomenon that is better known by the nickname of the anomalous creature responsible for them, Cousin Johnny. The Foundation had been trying to contain Cousin Johnny for decades, not that it ever done them any good. Johnny is a Keter-class anomaly that's thus far proven impossible to contain. This is an entity so dangerous and volatile that 3 different mobile task forces are devoted to detecting and disrupting its activities. MTF Upsilon 36, aka the Party Crashers, MTF Upsilon 52, aka Cater Duty, and MTF Upsilon 99, aka the Altar Boys. But so far, all the Foundation has been able to really do is swoop in afterwards and do their best to pick up the pieces of people's shattered lives. Cousin Johnny has so far been observed to only operate in the North American subcontinent and only seems to appear at Anglican or Catholic baptisms, weddings, and funerals. However, Foundation operatives charged with keeping a lid on Cousin Johnny harbor the hidden fear that he may one day expand his hunting grounds and wreak terror worldwide. If Johnny became multinational or multi-denominational, his violence, insanity, and pure evil may truly become impossible to minimize. So compatible communities are constantly monitored for increased levels of juvenile delinquency, sterility, domestic violence, and divorce. After all this, you're probably wondering, who or what actually is Cousin Johnny, and how does he cause so much horrific tragedy? At face value, nothing about the appearance of Cousin Johnny would suggest an anomalous nature, or even any sort of danger. He appears to be a middle-aged white male, often with scruffy hair and a beard. On a cellular level too, Cousin Johnny appears all too human, but when you look at his physiology, it's a whole different story. Cousin Johnny has no identifiable organs whatsoever. His body is made out of a fibrous muscular tissue. The only exceptions are his teeth and hair, which are made out of a kind of chitin, a key component of insect exoskeletons, such as those possessed by cicadas. Johnny's eyes are the first clue that something is off about him. From a distance, they appear perfectly normal, but up close, they're glassy and dead. This is because his eyes aren't actually attached to any nerves inside his head. With no nervous system or vocal cords, Johnny's ability to see, move, and talk defy any kind of logical explanation. His speech will seem completely normal to the people under his spell, but to anyone else it comes out as complete nonsense, often described as word salad. If people in attendance are briefed in advance about this phenomenon, whatever hypnotic ability causes them to hear his sounds as intelligible words won't work, and they'll be aware of how nonsensical it all sounds. But of course, that doesn't mean they're safe. Cousin Johnny appears at family gatherings and religious rituals, and immediately he'll be treated as though he's always been there. You know your Cousin Johnny, right? You go way back. Or at least you're pretty sure you do. Nothing will appear unnatural about his sudden presence. In fact, if you're one of the victims of one of his incidents, chances are you'll actually find yourself taking a shine to Cousin Johnny. Sure, his sense of humor is a little crude and raunchy, but you can't help but enjoy his company. He's a fun guy to be around. and after all, he's family. As previously mentioned, he'll only appear at 3 different kinds of events: baptisms, weddings, and funerals, and only those that are affiliated with either the Catholic or Anglican religions. The SCP Foundation has classified baptisms that Cousin Johnny attends as blue level events, weddings are known as white level events, and funerals are black level events, with each one escalating in severity, violence, and horror. First, baptisms, the blue level events. In these events, Cousin Johnny will appear and begin to act as a third godparent, despite there traditionally only being 2. As the infant is lowered into the holy water, the entirety of their top layer of skin will come off like a molting snake. Despite looking horrific, this apparently causes no harm to the child. The godparents will then eat this discarded skin as though it's the most normal thing in the world. After this, the family will leave the church together, and Cousin Johnny will leave with them. He won't appear at any subsequent celebrations of the child's baptism. Of course, this is just the beginning of the terror. Following Cousin Johnny's appearance at the baptism, the child's risk of dying in the next 6 months skyrockets, and if they survive, they're at an increased risk of becoming unstable and violent later on in life. Their parents and godparents will both become unable to conceive any further children and are likely to be found dead from drowning within 5 years of the event. Those who are only tangentially involved in the baptism ritual have a massively increased chance of failed pregnancies, or if they do conceive, they may become a danger to their offspring. Children who live through blue level events and survive past adolescence will experience adverse side effects when encountering the songs of cicadas well into adulthood, from experiencing physical sickness to going through dangerous psychotic episodes. Weddings or white level events are more complex and severe. In this case, Cousin Johnny will insert himself into the wedding as a groomsman, and the most horrifying events will begin to take place after the vows have been exchanged. Johnny will provide various implements that allow the bridesmaids and groomsmen to remove their teeth, which are then given to the bride and groom to eat, which they do, causing severe damage to their own teeth in the process. The groom will then vocalize an unknown cicada call at an incredible volume, as loud as 140 decibels in some instances, rendering the bride and everyone else near the altar completely deaf. At the wedding reception, where everyone is continuing to behave as if nothing out of the ordinary is happening, Cousin Johnny will ruin things farther by giving the best man's speech. The speech is more of his typical complete nonsense, though if you're there you'll never realize this, and think that this is the best speech you've ever heard, with some in the audience laughing hysterically while others cry uncontrollably. Once his speech is done, he'll present a gift to the newly married couple: 3.5 kilograms of human hair in various colors, 13 deceased specimens of a certain cicada known as Linnaeus cicada, and 23 human teeth in a cardboard box. DNA tests on all the gifts have been inconclusive as to their origin. Much like many celebrity marriages, unions that occurred during white-level events never last, and all end up divorced within 2 years, often as a result of domestic violence, and any children born during their brief marriage will be violent and unstable. But it's not just the wedding party that gets to experience the fun of a visit from Cousin Johnny. All married individuals who attended the wedding will find that they are unable to conceive children, despite no biological indicators of infertility. Any children present at the white level event will show no interest in romance throughout their life, and often die tragically before reaching the age of 18. Finally, and most horrifying of all, are funerals, or black level events. While blue and white level events can potentially be disrupted before they are completed, lessening or preventing the horrific results, there is as yet no way to stop or prevent a black level event at any stage. Any attempts to prevent Cousin Johnny from entering the church or funeral home will lead him to simply manifesting inside. Once in the room where the funeral is taking place, Cousin Johnny will first take up the role of eulogizer and begin speaking his standard nonsense to the attendants. The person who was emotionally closest to the departed will then open the casket, if this was not already an open casket funeral, and will then produce a large knife. It's unknown where the knives come from, as they're not present before the event and they disappear after. The funeral attendees will then use the knife on their wrists and sometimes throats, draining their blood into the coffin. Many lose more than enough blood to result in death, but none ever die from this. nor do they seem to feel any pain from their wounds. As the attendees take turns bleeding into the coffin, Cousin Johnny continues his eulogy, which eventually evolves into a cicada song, the kind sung by Linnea's cicada males. The attendants sing the same song back to him in a kind of call and response. Cousin Johnny will then approach the coffin and vomit in a mixture of blood, wood pulp, and dead cicadas. The funeral will then proceed as normal, and the blood, vomit, and cicada-filled casket is then taken to the cemetery and buried. Black level events will usually end with the body being interred in the ground, but if there's a wake after the funeral, the horrors of the black level event will continue. At the wake, Cousin Johnny will climb on top of a table, lie down, and encourage the other attendants to devour him, which they do. All the while he continues to talk his nonsense, until there is nothing left. Much like blue and white level events, being in attendance leads to horrific after effects. All participants who experience this event will separate from their family through either suicide, moving, or divorce. Every individual present at the event will also find that they are no longer able to produce offspring, and couples present may also fall victim to incidences of domestic violence, often involving cannibalism, that usually leave one or both participants dead, while 6 out of 10 children involved will attempt to murder one or both of their parents before they turn 18. These black level events are so horrible for all involved that any members of the specialized Cousin Johnny mobile task forces that happen to witness such an event are treated with Class A amnestics before they are transferred to another task force or retire, to ensure that they don't have to live with the memories of what they saw. Prior to that, they are closely monitored for any strange or antisocial behavior to make sure they weren't affected by the event. And they aren't the only SCP Foundation staff at risk of having been impacted by Cousin Johnny. It is theorized that as many as a third of Catholic and Anglican D-Class personnel were involved in a black level event at some point, and were driven to madness and violence by their fateful brushes with the strange relative that no one knows. So next time you're at a baptism, or a wedding, or a funeral, stay vigilant. Keep an eye on the other guests, and always ask yourself, do you really have a Cousin Johnny? Qinghai Lake. The largest lake in China is one of the most secure locations the SCP Foundation has ever taken control of. All available military assets have been gathered at the site, including 3 of the most elite Mobile Task Force units with experimental weaponry. SCP-4290 must not be allowed to open, and the site has been surrounded by nuclear mines and targeted with the Dagaz Break orbital strike system. The perimeter cannot be breached, even if it means the complete annihilation of the entire area. This is considered to be an acceptable loss for the Foundation, since the destruction that would be caused by taking such an extreme measure is far from the worst-case scenario when it comes to SCP-4290. That's because the entity contained within SCP-4290's site has the potential to create a true end-of-the-world scenario. The Foundation, of course, is no stranger to such situations, and even has a set of designations for the various types of apocalypses, like CK-class restructuring scenarios, and ZK-class end-of-reality scenarios. And since dealing with the end of the world is nothing new for the Foundation, certain precautions have been taken at the 4290 site. If containment measures fail, selected Foundation personnel and civilians will be taken into nearby emergency shelters that will hopefully survive the chaos that would occur following a breach. And the Foundation assumed that there was a good chance this plan would have to be used at some point, since at the time these precautions were put in place, it was impossible to know the chance of successful long-term containment. But just what is the entity that is held within the site of SCP-4290 that is capable of causing so much death and destruction on a major scale? They call it simply the Child. No one has ever seen the Child. No one knows what the entity is. That's because even setting aside all the Foundation's security, the site itself is still deeply protected. Literally. Over 100 feet below the surface of Qinghai Lake, a stunning collection of relics can be found. The site is thaumaturgically sealed with 8 massive metal totems made of beryllium and bronze that resemble armed warriors. The statues are inscribed with runes and arranged in a pattern designed to banish the entity kept there and keep the seal on its prison closed.
Archaeological evidence indicates that the site has been there for a very long time, and it is still active, with the center of the site periodically emitting bursts of red light. But lately, the bursts have suddenly started getting brighter. You may be wondering how we know so much about SCP-4290, and that it's a site designed to keep something sealed if it's been deep in a lake quietly doing its job. The SCP Foundation has access to unusual sources, including SCP-1726, and it's from there that we learned the little we know about SCP-4290. SCP-1726 is a library in China that appears to only be one floor from the outside, but on the inside covers over 14 square kilometers in area. It's full of a seemingly limitless amount of texts, many of which describe ancient and lost civilizations, along with some clues as to what led to the fall of these cultures. One text reveals the presence of a terrible and apparently unstoppable enemy. It was called the Child, but it was anything but innocent. When these texts were translated, what Foundation researchers discovered terrified them. They described the emergence of a beast with 10 terrible mouths and 20 arms stretched wide. It was attacked by an army of warriors, but they were quickly overwhelmed by what was described as torrents of darkness and dead geometries. They were killed brutally, and the Child used its skeletal fingers to unleash a torrent of flame. Every soul in the vicinity was consumed. Wax rained from the sky, and the Child devoured everything around it for 10 days, as the whole world trembled. But then something sealed the Child away in its prison, which is now covered by the waters of Qinghai Lake. Soon, ominous signs began to appear that the Child would awaken again, though. One day, televisions in the nearby area all suddenly stopped playing their regular programming and began to show images of SCP-4290, with a mysterious voice coming on over the images saying, "Repair the Child's locks." This became more and more frequent, and the tone of the voice became more worried, eventually saying, "There is little time left." Further investigations of the location revealed the location of the mysterious mechanism that kept the chamber sealed, which was designated as SCP-4290 lock. But how do you repair a device that is eons old? And should you even be fixing it when the one telling you to do so is a mysterious disembodied voice that only appears on pirated television broadcasts? The Foundation scrambled to find any information they could, and they were able to find clues about the history of SCP-4290 referenced in other texts. Lost civilizations like the Xia Dynasty, the Erkshans, and the ancient Orthonians had apparently strengthened the seals during their own reigns. But the most significant findings indicated a connection to one of the most terrifying entities the SCP Foundation had ever contained, and one of the most unpredictable, the David Empire. This mysterious warlike civilization has only been known through one source, SCP-140, a single hard copy book titled A Chronicle of Devas. This is a strange, anomalous book that is written in blood and is able to add more pages spontaneously to itself whenever it comes in contact with any fluid that can be used for writing, but seems to especially prefer human blood. It recounts the history of this civilization and their many brutal conquests. While there was no proof of the Devas before the book was found, evidence paralleling the events written in the book is now being found in archaeological digs. More dangerously, as more pages appear in the book, the events of the Deva Empire are moving closer to present day, with them currently appearing in the book as having existed until 270 CE. The Devas were a bloodthirsty, brutal race of warriors. But there was one thing even they were afraid of: the Child. The Devas had performed the last successful ritual of sacrifice needed to strengthen the lock not long before their currently described destruction, and the book contained enough detail to recreate the ritual. But SCP researchers would find that performing it would not be for the faint of heart. The ritual required 3 human cadavers, not a problem for an organization that's normal day-to-day operation results in the loss of multiple lives, and the live heart of an angel. The description of the ritual said that the materials would be presented, new runes should be carved into the totems. The items would then vanish when the ritual was completed, and the lock would somehow be renewed by this. It wasn't much to go on, but time was running out. The Foundation's Department of Occult Containment quickly sprang into action, assembling the materials and placing them in the correct formation. While it was not safe to descend that deep underwater to perform the ritual manually, technology could fill the role. A fleet of remotely operated submersibles equipped with carving material would carry the materials and perform the ritual without any human hands needed. One of the red bursts occurred midway through the ritual, causing radiation damage to the vehicles. Runes that have been carved in the past were also damaged, and the ritual was interrupted. While it seemed like it might have been enough to activate the site, it wasn't perfect. And when the ritual was complete, one of the 3 cadavers and half of the angel heart were still present at the site. Had it been enough to satisfy the ritual and reseal the lock? There was nothing to do but wait and see. They wouldn't have to wait long for their answer, as the mysterious voice once again took over the televisions in the area. This time, its message was less friendly. The sacrifice did not reach the 10 maws. Brace. The child apparently was not satisfied, and the lock was not sealed. Everyone feared it was too late to prevent what was coming, and panic was starting to spread among the ranks. One day, several personnel stationed at the Qinghai Lake site broke protocol and fled. None of them were ever found, but one fugitive staff member, an agent Zenobia Marinos, left behind a note though. It read, "Do we think we can actually stop this? No civilization before us wanted to fight the child. None of them. The sacrifices won't work anymore. It refuses to consume them. They aren't enough to satiate it. Once the seal breaks, we'll have a world of molten darkness and the child will be all that's left. Eating, drinking. You're fools for staying." Agent Marinos was apparently so scared that she had fled through a portal to an extra-dimensional space in order to escape. There would be no point in trying to track her, even if she was still alive. But in our own dimension, time was running out. Foundation seismologists were brought to the site and stationed outside, and began monitoring the high-energy pulses coming from behind the lock. The energy was reportedly strong enough to alter dimensions, and the pulsing red light now covered the entire ceiling site, growing stronger and stronger as the totems started degrading at an alarming rate. The Foundation stood on guard for whatever was about to emerge, but no one knew if they had any chance against whatever it was. On August 18th, the totems fully disintegrated. Some of the Foundation's best military forces gathered on the shores of the lake and waited. 10 minutes later, something massive emerged, phased out of the lock and onto the seabed, and didn't move. The assembled Foundation forces were confused and continued to observe the creature, and after no activity was seen after 3 hours, the authorization was given for submersibles and a small exploratory team to proceed down to the seabed for an up-close investigation. There, down on the floor of the lake, was the child. It was as terrifying as described, with a countless mouths and arms and huge in size, over 40 meters long. The signs of previous rituals were everywhere, with angel hearts and human corpses littered around, some in the creature's mouth, but none of them had been eaten. The ritual had apparently been performed many times, but to no actual purpose. The massive being was scanned many times, but no sign of psychic energy, radiation, or other life signs were detected. The child was dead, and it had apparently been so for a very, very long time. Once the area had been cleared, teams were brought in to investigate the body in person and perform an autopsy on site. No explanation of what exactly this creature had been or what its origins were has ever been discovered, but they did get answers for when it died. The time of death was roughly 9,000 years ago, not long after its initial sealing. The cause of death was discovered too. The child destroyer of worlds and scourge of countless civilizations had died from malnutrition. Whatever this thing had been, it had been sealed away and had died from hunger not long after. One civilization after another had continued to perform the rituals to keep it sealed, never aware that it was no longer a threat. With this new discovery, SCP-4290 was reclassified as neutralized, but the child taught us all a valuable lesson about being prepared for potential world-ending scenarios. And the Foundation continues to stand on alert for any more entities from the distant past that may pose a threat today. Because who knows what else is sealed away at the bottom of a lake, abandoned mine, or in the ocean's deepest trenches. There might just be another existential threat to humanity that's just waiting for a chance to emerge and help us all if it remembered to pack a lunch.
A team of archaeologists uncovers a giant ceramic vase in the ruins of an ancient Greek city. They carefully brush away the sand and debris that surrounds it. The head archaeologist grabs a ladder and places it gently against the 8-foot-tall vase. "I'm gonna see if there's anything inside," he says. The archaeologist climbs the ladder and peers over the lip of the ceramic vase. The inside is completely black. "I can't see anything," he shouts down to the rest of the team. He reaches his arm into the pot to see if he can feel anything. A couple of seconds later, he releases a yelp of pain.
Something bit me!
He yells. The archaeologist pulls his hand out of the darkness and climbs down the ladder.
"Is there an animal inside?"
A fellow archaeologist asks. But before the question can be answered, the ceramic vase begins to shake. Thousands of tiny creatures resembling a rat mixed with a pug flood out of the top of the vase. They start clawing and biting the archaeologists. The men run away screaming in terror. Many are consumed by the wave of creatures. Others are overwhelmed as they try to scramble up the ruins to safety. Only minutes after the lead archaeologist stuck his hand into the ceramic vase, the screams are silenced. The creatures wander aimlessly around the ancient Greek city. The SCP Foundation hears of the incident and sends a team to investigate. They classify the anomalous vase as SCP-019. When they arrive on the scene, the thousands of creatures that were manifested from the vase are found dead. These entities are designated SCP-019-2 and incinerated before any tourists visiting the archaeological site see the corpses. The extraction team examines the vase itself. It seems like a normal, although very large, ceramic from antiquity. The scientists put in charge of securing SCP-019 are Dr. Light and Dr. Vox. "Be careful," Light says. "We don't know what the connection is between the vase and these creatures. It seems as if they came out of it, but our instruments aren't detecting anything inside and there's no way they could have all fit into that thing anyway." Dr. Vox, who is closely examining the vase, comes to the same conclusion. They take a step back as the extraction team prepares to put ropes in place to move SCP-019. A rope is thrown over the vase. Part of it lands on top of the lip. Instantly, an instance of SCP-019-2 appears from the ceramic. It begins running around, clawing and biting anything it can, but is eventually captured by Dr. Vox. "Well, now we know where the creatures came from. We'll bring it back to the lab for further study," the doctor says as he hands the creature off to one of the agents. The ropes are secured and the team begins to move the vase, but with every moment, another SCP-019-2 instance appears from the artifact. "This is gonna get really annoying," says Dr. Light. "Let's put the whole damn thing in a mobile containment chamber and let those little creatures run on top of each other rather than us chasing them around." "Agreed," replies Vox. A containment pod is brought in. The team quickly moves SCP-019 into it, as instance after instance of SCP-019-2 manifests from the vase. The doors to the pod are sealed. Light and Vox watch hundreds of small creatures run around inside. They bring the vase secured in the containment pod back to the SCP Foundation site, where it can be studied further. It is transferred to a containment chamber where it is observed by Light and Vox. After a few days, SCP-019 slows the manifestation rate of the SCP-019-2 creatures. When the vase was first secured, agents were ordered to shoot the creatures on sight, but the number of bullets being used was unreasonable, so they resorted to flamethrowers. The doctors decided the best course of action is to put SCP-019 into a room hooked up to an incinerator. This way, if too many creatures are manifested, they can all be burnt to a crisp with the push of a button. Dr. Vox can't help but think that this must have been what Captain Kirk felt like on the Starship Enterprise when it became infested with tribbles. Eventually, it is discovered that as long as SCP-019 is kept at 0 degrees Celsius and no one goes near it, the object only manifests one creature per hour. This is much easier to manage than the hordes of SCP-019-2 instances that came out of the vase previously. Doctors Light and Vox observe and collect data on SCP-019 through a glass viewport that looks into its containment chamber. The incinerator is turned on at least every 24 hours just to clear the room of creatures. When they are not working with the vase itself, the doctors examine SCP-019-2 entities to try and understand what they are and what they want. They capture one of the creatures and put it in a reinforced pen. Light and Vox provide the specimen with live chickens for food and as much water as the creature can drink. The noises that SCP-019-2 makes sounds like muffled sets of words. When linguists are brought in, they determine that the vocalizations are phonetically similar to ancient Hellenic languages. This is consistent with what was spoken at the ancient Greek city, where the ceramic vase was found. The doctors gave the specimen a series of puzzles to solve. It can make its way through a maze to find a piece of chicken, but when it is given opportunities to show its sentience, SCP-019-2 always falls short. Dr. Light and Dr. Vox determined the creatures are about as intelligent as lab rats. One of the most peculiar things is that SCP-019-2 instances only live for less than 48 hours. No matter how much food, water, or care is given to the creatures, they drop dead in a day or two after being manifested. Dr. Light moves one of the dead critters to an operating room where it can be dissected. She cuts down the middle of its stomach with a scalpel and peels the skin and muscle away. "Well, that explains that," she says to the other researchers standing in the room. "The muscles seem to degrade rapidly from the instant SCP-019-2 is manifested into our world. There is basically no digestive tract other than a mouth and throat, but the most surprising thing is the complete lack of internal organs." Dr. Vox pushes the intercom button from the viewing room in which he is observing the procedure. "What do you mean there are no internal organs? It must have some sort of brain and cardiovascular system." "Yeah, but that's about it," Dr. Light responds. "There appears to be a very simple central nervous system with a brain the size of a pea and a heart, but nothing else. This creature can't metabolize the food it eats or filter out toxins, and I have no idea how it breathes. We need to run more tests." With each new specimen that's examined, the results are the same. The creatures aren't very intelligent, they die in under 48 hours, and they lack pretty much any internal organs. Then one day, everything changes for the worst. The guard posted to watch over SCP-019 notes something strange occurred during his shift. Without fail, the vase manifests an instance of SCP-019-2 every hour, but around 3 a.m., no creature was generated. Or at least that's what appeared to happen. The guard puts on protective equipment and enters the room to get a closer look, but there is nothing there. He locks up, records the anomaly, and returns to the viewing glass to continue his watch. Over the next hour, the vase manifests a creature as if everything is back to normal. The next day, Light and Vox arrive at work to find everything in chaos. The power in different sections of the facility is failing. It is as if something has gotten into the ducts and is chewing through the wiring. A team of agents uses thermal imaging devices to track down the entity that is causing all the mayhem. They bring it back to the research lab. "Take a look at this," the agent says, pointing at an empty operating table. He hands Dr. Light his thermal imaging goggles. Without them, there appears to be nothing on the table, but when she looks through the device, she can see an instance of SCP-019-2. "My God," Dr. Light whispers. "They're evolving." The creature is exactly the same as all the others, except this one is invisible. Suddenly, an alarm goes off and red warning lights turn on across the facility. Light rips off the goggles and looks at Dr. Vox. "We need to get back to the vase now," she yells. They sprint out of the operating room and down the hall. As they turn the corner, they hear gunshots and the spray of fire from flamethrowers. On the other side of the corridor where SCP-019 is contained, there are agents battling with thousands of instances of SCP-019-2. The flamethrowers that had been so effective at killing the creatures now appear useless. It is as if the creatures have evolved some sort of protective skin to combat the flames. "Oh no," gasps Dr. Light. "We gotta get out of here." She grabs Dr. Vox's shoulder and drags him with her as she runs down the hall. Behind them, the scream of agents can be heard. They are quickly muffled as thousands upon thousands of SCP-019-2 creatures overwhelm them. Light glances behind her to see what is happening. What she finds is a wall of creatures rushing towards her. There must be millions now. It seems like SCP-019 was tired of being contained by the Foundation and has sent an invasion force to escape its captors. "We're not going to make it!" Vox yells. He stumbles and falls to the ground. Dr. Light skids to a stop and turns to go back for him, but it's too late. The wave of SCP-019-2 is closing in. She watches in horror as Dr. Vox is consumed by the mass of creatures. She turns and continues to run. The exit is in sight. Dr. Light makes a dash towards the door. She can feel the tiny feet of the creatures clawing at her heels. She gives it everything she's got and accelerates, putting some distance between her and the millions of SCP-019-2 entities. Dr. Light slams through the exit door and immediately closes it behind her. She manages to slide the metal locking bar into place. The impact from the wave of creatures against the door sends her stumbling backwards. She is safe now. As Light lays on the ground panting and staring at the door, she thinks to herself, well, they'll all be dead in a couple of days, and then we can try again. Now watch SCP-001 Which is the Real 001 SCP animation, or check out SCP-823 Carnival of Horrors SCP animation.